Hotep family. Don't know why the camera's grainy, uh, but thank you for joining me. Today we're going to read the Revolutionary Handbook, no, the Handbook on Revolutionary Warfare. This is written by Kwame Nkrumah, and while some may be opposed to reading Nkrumah because he's a misogynist, just remember he's also revolutionary, and he's the founder of a modern nation. This is what you aren't, more or less. You know, not too many people can say that they're founders of modern nations, and because of that, because he's a revolutionary, and revolutionary work and revolutionary warfare is important, you got to put some respect on his name. All right, so we're gonna look at this book, and I hope you enjoy it. So far, what I've seen, I've liked. All right, let's go. I'm gonna read the back of the book, and if you want to get this book, like I said, just join the Discord. Click on the Discord and just say, where the book's at, and hopefully somebody can assist you. Otherwise, here we are. I'm gonna try to read through the whole thing. So let's get it. The founder of modern. We're reading the back of the book right now. The founder of the modern Ghana and an outstanding leader of the African Revolution presents his analysis of the new stage of the revolution and his proposal for the continental coordination of the armed and political struggle for liberation. The significant historical document provides basic source material for all those interested in the latest phase of the liberation movement in Africa. So again, this is the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And it's a guide to the armed phase of the African revolution. Remember, Africa needs a revolution. Okay, so this is to the African guerrilla. This is not really written toward many of the people who will talk crap. This is written toward those who want to take action. Because at the end of the day, action is the most important thing. Warfare is one of the most important things. So uh, let's understand this. So this is a publisher's note. The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare was published toward the end of 1968 by Pan-African Books, Ltd., London. A significant historical document provides basic source material for the study of the new phase of the African Revolution. Within the present decade, guerrilla warfare has emerged as a new feature of the liberation movement in those areas of southern Africa dominated by white racial minorities, beginning with the launching of armed struggles in the Portuguese colonies of Angola, Guinea-Bissau, and later in Mozambique. It appeared also in Southwest Africa, and more recently in the Union of South Africa and Rhodesia. Other African countries have helped train and supply the guerrilla forces, while preparations for similar movements seem to be underway elsewhere in Africa. That means that all over Africa there were revolutionaries. Okay, all over Africa there were revolutionaries. Don't like, you gotta put respect on the name. All right, put respect on the name. So, although each of these liberation movements have their specific features and their own leaderships, there is present a strong tendency toward the coordination of their efforts in face of the supranational, oppressive military role being assumed by the apartheid oligarchy of South Africa and the intervention of the neo-colonial powers. A formal coordinating body already exists for the struggle in the Portuguese colonies, and the movements in Rhodesia and South Africa are coordinated through their respective organizations. In the Handbook, President Kwame Nkrumah presents his analysis of the new stage of the African Revolution as a proposal for anti-imperialist coordination on a continental scale. So this is the objective. This is the goal. Let's see. So anyway, if you like what you're hearing, like I said, like, subscribe, share, and you can talk to me in the chat room. Hey everyone. All right, but let's keep reading. All right, so the author's note. The book has been written during my stay in Conakry. Previous notes I made for a manual of guerrilla warfare for African freedom fighters were left behind in Ghana when I departed for Hanoi on 21st February 1966. The manuscript was handed over to imperialist and neo-colonial intelligence organizations by the military and police traitors. You're going to have traitors among you. You're going to have traitors among you, but you have to work against that, okay? Work against that. The handbook, presenting a completely new approach, will, I hope to make possible the successful completion of the armed phase of the African revolutionary struggle for total emancipation and an all-African Union government. All right, so he's looking to force us into all African Union government, and that's what you're supposed to be looking to do. You're supposed to be looking to use force for your will. You're supposed to that's like force for your will, but political force, not in your personal lives, not personal force, but political force. Okay. The Black Power movement in the USA and the struggle of peoples of African descent in the Caribbean, South America, and elsewhere form an integral part of the African political, military, revolutionary struggle. Our victory will be their victory also, and the victory of all the revolutionary, oppressive, and excluded masses of the world who are challenging the capitalist, imperialist, and neo-colonialist power structure of reaction and counter-revolution. So understand this again. The revolutionary, the Ancobia. That's how I would use Ancobia and Ascati. So the counter-revolutionaries, the reactionaries, these are the Ascati, okay? And then you want the revolutionaries, the action, people of action. That's the Ancobia. It's the dichotomy you're going to see play out all the time. So let's just get into it. I'm gonna check again. Peace, brother. How you doing? All right. Let's see. Hope I can be heard well. But all right, let's go. The rules of discipline: obey orders in all of your actions. This is important. This means that you want to have a hierarchy in this whole in the whole scheme of things. You want a hierarchy. Number 2, do not take a single needle or piece of thread from the masses. That means you do not have any personal gains in this revolution before, that are not allocated to you by the political body, by the hierarchy. You do not, as your own person, try to seek some sort of individual, personal, material gain. That's not what you're fighting for. Number 3, turn everything captured. Again, you want to give everything that you capture, whether they be people, objects, anything, money, anything that you capture, you want to turn it into the hierarchy, to the political body. Number 4, speak politely. That's something that nobody really understands, right? Number 5, pay fairly for what you buy. That means do not. That means balance. It's reciprocity. The goal is ma'at. The goal is. The goal is ma'at. The goal is. Hold on a second. I guess I gotta. I see that was supposed to be linking the video. Let me just put it on. The goal is ma'at. The goal is doing for our people and get it. You don't seek to use your force, you use your military power, use your political acumen or whatever, your political position to get more than you have. So you pay fairly for what you buy. Okay, number 6, you return everything you borrow. Again, you're not there to steal. Number 7, you pay for anything you damage. If you damage something, then again, you're not fighting the people. You're fighting the Ascati. You're fighting the counter-revolutionaries. You're trying to implement a new system over our people that serve that over, but also serving our people. So you do not want to damage our own things. Number 8, you do not hit or swear at people. Again, the people, the masses are not your enemies. The enemies are those who are in power that you're trying to replace, and you replace in order to do better for our people, in order to implement revolution, in order to implement a solution or resolution, if you will. That's the whole goal. So number 8, do not hit or swear at people. Number 9, do not damage crops. Again, the crops are what sustain people. Do not do that. Number 10, do not take liberties with women. Do not use your power. Again, this is warfare. Common in warfare is to try to take advantage of women, especially in the West. The Western model is to try to take advantage of women. That's not your goal. Again, your goal is not to fight in order to get from the people, from the masses, is to get the power structure, away from the enemies. Okay, away from the Ascati, away from the hybrids, the white folk, away from our enemies. Okay, so you want to capture the state, but you do not want to abuse our people. And then this is another one, 11. Do not ill-treat captives. It's not your goal. If you're the guerrilla warrior. Again, you turn everything captured. You just turn in the people. You don't have to treat them ill. If they drop their weapons, then you just say, look, sit down, and we're taking you to headquarters. That's it. Or we're taking you to where we take the captives. But you don't have to. You don't have to abuse them. You don't have to. Even if they were shooting at you, they were trying to kill you. Yes, that's what they're doing. But you hand them over, because you never know what kind of what the headquarters, what the hierarchy can do for these people. And sometimes, you can also turn some of these captives into spies, or turn some of these captives into whatever. It's not your call. That's the whole point. It's not your call to do these things. Number 12, keep your eyes and ears open. All right, that means pay attention to your surrounding. Pay attention to your ambiance. Number 13, know the enemy within. All right, this is really critical, and something that we all kind of fail on, mostly because if you know about a lot of the other revolutionaries, particularly, a lot of times it was their friends, it was their confidants, it was their right hand who betrayed them. You have to know the enemy within. All right, and the number 14, always guide and protect the children. You're not looking to harm children. You're not looking to chastise children. You're not looking to any of that stuff. You're looking, like when it comes to children, that's the main people you're supposed to protect. Hotep. That's the main people you're supposed to protect. So pay attention to that. Always guide and protect children. And that's the thing. Anytime somebody is, untoward towards children, like, just forget it. That this is clearly an unstable individual, right? Number 15, always be the servant of the people. That's what you're here for. You're here to serve the people. So we're gonna try to read through this thing. And again, like I said, if anybody's interested in this book, just go on the Discord and you can have it. Go on the Discord. You can get the book. Maybe I should put the link inside the description, but yeah, just pick up the book. It's on the. Maybe I'll just do that quickly, just so that you guys could, if you want to read along, you can read along. All right. I'll wait for my computer to go over here. But let's go back to this. Let's read right now. Contents. Book 1. Know the enemy. All right. Preface chapter. All right. So I don't need to read that. This is just the table of contents. It's a long book. I'm going to try to get through it. The guerrilla is the masses of the arms. And don't worry if you can't stay along for the whole book, because obviously, you obviously have better things to do. But let me just see if I can link you the book. I'm trying to drop the link. I haven't connected my Google Drive. All right. Everybody's good though? Is everyone good? This thing's going too slow with this. My internet decides to go slow now. It's crazy. Everything decides to go slow. Alright, so let's go to this. So book 1, Know the Enemy. Preface. The new phase of the armed revolutionary struggle in Africa embraces the entire continent. It is essential that we know what we fight and why we fight. Imperialism and Neocolonialism must be broken down into their parts, so that we can clearly see them. We must know their world strategy. In this book, I have attempted to show the nature and extent of imperialist and neocolonialist aggression and our objective in the struggle for the freedom and political unification of Africa. So chapter 1, the world strategy of imperialism. So know the enemy. A number of external factors affect the African situation, and if our liberation struggle is to be placed in correct perspective and we are to know the enemy, the impact of these factors must be fully grasped. First among them is imperialism, for it is mainly against exploitation and poverty that our people revolt. Our people do not want to be exploited. Our people do not want to be in poverty, and that's why we revolt. That's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for an end to exploitation and an end to poverty, which is something that's actually possible. Don't let the capitalists fool you. But it is therefore of paramount importance to set out the strategy of imperialism in clear terms. Okay, 1. The means used by the enemy to ensure the continued economic exploitation of our territories, and 2, the nature of the attempts made to destroy the liberation movement. So imperialism, that's the two factors. That's the two strategies of imperialism. Once the components of the enemy's strategies are determined, we will be in a position to outline the correct strategy for our own struggle in terms of our actual situation and in accordance with our objectives. All right, so let's see this. Let's see if I can. Okay, let me get this link for you guys. Get shareable link. Alright. Hold on a second. Copy link. Alright, let me share this with you guys. Alright, so I sent the link in the comment box. So, and actually, let me put it in the description too. Put it in the description. Alright. Okay, so Alright. Alright. Alright, let's go. Before the Second World War, the world, excluding the USSR, China, was divided into A. Capitalist states practicing orthodox imperialism under the generally known form of imperialism, and B. Colonial territories which fed the economies of the capitalist imperialist states. The Latin American territories have already passed from the status of Spanish and Portuguese colonies to that of neo-colonies. However, after the Second World War, serious economic, social, and political tensions arose in both spheres. A. Inside the capitalist imperialist states, workers' organizations had become comparatively strong and experienced, and the claims of the working class for a more substantial share of wealth produced by the capitalist economy could no longer be ignored. The necessity to concede had become all the more imperative since the European capitalist system had been seriously shaken up by the near Holocaust, which marked the experience of imperialist wars. Okay, B. While the capitalist system exploitation was coming to grips with its internal crisis, the world's colonized areas were astir within the upsurge of strong liberation movements. Here again, demands could no longer be cast aside or ignored, especially when they were channeled through irresistible mass movements, like the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain, the Parti Démocratique de Guinée, and in the Convention People's Party in Ghana. In certain areas, for example, in Vietnam and Kenya and Algeria, direct confrontation demonstrated the readiness of the oppressed peoples to implement their claims with blood and fire. Both in the colonial territories and in the metropolitan states, the struggle was being waged against the same enemy, international finance capital, under its external and internal forms of exploitation, imperialism, and capitalism. So it's just important to realize that white people are organized in a certain manner. And there is, right here, he says international finance capital. So this is capitalism. International finance capital has, if you're inside of it, its extreme capitalism would be fascism. Whereas when you're outside of it, it's imperialist exploitation. So there's capitalist exploitation and there's imperialist exploitation. And that will be primitive imperialism, which is colonialism, right? So threatened with disintegration by the double-fisted attack of the working class movement and the liberation movement, capitalism had to launch a series of reforms in order to build a protective armor around the inner workings of its system. So this is important, like, because sometimes I do say, and this is something I was thinking about right before I even wrote this book. I mean, even before I was reading this book, I said, you know, we have to realize that sometimes we say, hey, black people in America got to repatriate, right? But, you know, the claim that, unfortunately, yes, it's hard to survive in America, obviously. Long term, the survival of the people in America is not really something that can be promised. But, you know, on the one hand, the fight in America can distract, essentially, can distract from the fight in Africa. Because at the end of the day, we have to be revolutionaries. We have to be revolutionaries in Africa. Okay? Now, revolutionaries, that means that we have to do like Kwame Nkrumah and create a nation state that is, and we're going to be opposed by counter-revolutionaries. We're going to be opposed by Ascati. We're going to be opposed by the Neo-Colonialists, the Imperialists. We're going to be opposed, but we have to fight them. We have to, like it's not a joke. It's not a joke. We have to take up arms, and we know this. And it sounds, you know, hearing it from me, you might be like, well, wait, why would you say that? I don't see that. But it's, the world runs on warfare. That's one of the messages. All right. So to avoid an internal breakdown of the system under the pressure of the workers' protest movement, The governments of capitalist countries granted their workers certain concessions which did not endanger the basic nature of the capitalist system of exploitation. They gave them social security, higher wages, better working conditions, professional training facilities, and other improvements. These reforms helped to blur fundamental contradictions and to remove some of the more glaring injustices, while at the same time ensuring the continued exploitation of the workers. The myth was established of an affluent capitalist society promising abundance and a better life for all. The basic aim, however, was the establishment of a welfare state as the only safeguard against the threat of fascism or communism. So they made a welfare state. Okay, the capitalists make a welfare state. Right here, see? Welfare state, fascism. Imperialist states, they do independence. They give you independence, which is generally independent states, or puppet states, or collective imperialism, which is neocolonialism. Strengthened workers' organization and expansion of liberation movements. So you have external pressure and internal pressure against the capitalist imperialist states. However, the problem was to find a way to avoid sacrificing the all-important principle of ever-increasing profits for the owning minority, and also find the money needed to finance the welfare state, right? So how do you finance the welfare state? So by way of solution, capitalism proceeded to introduce not only internal reforms, but external reforms, decided to raise the extra money needed for the establishment and the maintenance of the welfare state at home. So the people in the United States, you have to realize, are in the welfare state at home. Okay, they're in the welfare state at home, and that's something that we have to understand, right? In other words, modern capitalism had come to depend more heavily than before on the exploitation of the material and human resources of the colonial territories. On the external front, therefore, it became necessary for international finance capital to carry out reforms in order to eliminate the deadly threat to its supremacy of the liberation movements. All right? Yeah, so they had to do reforms, right? The urgent need for such reforms was made clear by the powerful growth and expansion of the liberation forces in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where revolutionary movements had not only seized power, but were actually consolidating their gains. Development in the USSR, China, Cuba, North Vietnam, North Korea, and in Egypt, Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Algeria, and other parts of Africa showed that not only was the world balance of forces shifting, but the capitalist imperialist states were confronted with the real danger of encirclement. Okay? Yeah. Collective imperialism. The modifications introduced by imperialism and its strategy were expressed through the disappearance of the numerous old-fashioned colonies owing exclusive allegiance to a single metropolitan country. So that disappearance of the numerous old-fashioned colonies owing exclusive to these single metropolitan countries. Yeah. Through the replacement of national imperialisms by a collective imperialism in which the USA occupies a leading position. So even though there was so no longer are there nations doing imperialism, but there's a collective white move, like a white imperialism essentially, and the USA comes in to play. So once upon a time the USA was kind of like on the outside, on the fringe, but now it's kind of in the lead, right? The roots of this process may be traced back to the period of the Second World War, when the socialist camp was still too small and weak to give decisive assistance to the European working class movement. The workers were therefore all the more easily deflected from the objectives of the struggle and allowed themselves to be dragged into a bloody war of imperialism. The Second World War, and this is what I'm saying, I don't really have any faith in these white European working class, but like Nkrumah does, so it's okay. The Second World War seriously strained the political and economic strength of Europe, although capitalism as a system emerged relatively intact. However, the true winner of the whole contest turned out to be the United States of America. Having helped the Allies to win the war, the USA was from then on able to retain its preeminent position and to require increasing influence in its economic life of the exhausted European states. And that's what I'm saying. You have to take advantage of the disorder of other countries. The United States, and you have to put yourself in a position to take advantage of the disorder of other nations. This is what the United States did. The United States said, hey, you know what? Even if Germany is ahead of me, even if France and US, or even not even ahead or just comparable, whatever the case, when they went into war and they all exhausted themselves, everyone in the world took advantage. Everyone in the world could have taken advantage, but the people who took the most advantage were the people who were in the best position to take the advantage. And that was the United States. So that's part of warfare, is to take advantage of opportunities. That's part of life in general. Take advantage of opportunities. Uh, you see an opportunity, take it, more or less, if you can. The internationalism or syndicalization, okay, enabled U.S. imperialism to forestall temporarily an incipient crisis by fulfilling two sine qua non conditions. One, the need to expand. The U.S.-European post-war alliance not only enabled the USA to benefit from the advantages of the European market, which had hitherto been largely closed to its penetration, but also opened up a new horizon in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where the USA had already superseded European supremacy and established neocolonialist domination. See what I'm saying? The need to militarize. The militarization of the U.S. economy, based on the political pretext of the threatening rise of the USSR and later the People's Republic of China as socialist powers, enabled the USA to postpone its internal crisis, first during the Hot War and then during the Cold War, since 1945. Militarization served two main purposes. It absorbed and continues to absorb an excess of unorganized energy into the intense armaments drive which supports imperialist aggression and many blocs and alliances formed by imperialist powers over the last 20 years. And number two, it made possible an expensive policy of paternalist corruption of the poor and oppressed people of the world. The U.S. just played everything smart. The principle of mutual inter-imperialist assistance, whereby American, British, French, and West German monopoly capital extends joint control over the wealth of the non-liberated zones of Africa, Latin America, and Asia, finds concrete expression in the formation of interlocked international financial institutions and bodies of credit. International Monetary Fund, the USA is 25% of the votes. International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, USA is 34% of the votes. International Development Association, USA is 41% of the votes. On a lesser scale, Europe as a whole, and West Germany in particular, find profitable outlets for big business in Africa through the agency of such organizations as the European Common Market. The imperialists even make use of the United Nations organization in order to camouflage their neo-colonialist objectives. This can be seen, for example, in U.S. policy in South Korea and the Congo. Now, remember, the Congo is a really important, the Congo is the heart of Africa. Just remember that. But this is, again, you see this finance capital. The reality is that we could participate in this finance economy as well, but we kind of don't. And I mean, we probably can't particularly participate in the scale that they do. I'm not going to front and say that we have international monetary funds kind of money, but even low scale financing is something that we could do, we could accomplish, and we're not really active in doing so. So that's one thing that we have to consider as a people. Let's keep going. Sham independence. But as far as the imperialists are concerned, the real solution to the problem of continued exploitation through concessions and reform lies in the concept of sham independence. A state can be said to be a neo-colonialist or client state if it is independent de jure and dependent de facto. It is a state where political power lies in the conservative forces of the former colony and where economic power remains under the control of international finance capital. So those are the two things you want to get rid of, and that's why it's really important. I think later on I want to express that one of the main things you want to seek in life is political power, and you'll only get it. You'll only truly get it in, I want to say, in a majority African nation. But you have to, to get that political power, you have to make sure that nation, you have to actively fight against the forces that would have that nation, dependent on its former colonies or dependent on international finance capital. You do not need that kind of stuff. But of course, that's a really difficult thing. But that's why you have to use force, because the reality is this: they're going to use force to stop you from stopping them, and that's the problem. And it's not the problem. That's what you should expect. You should expect and anticipate that your enemies will want to control you. And if you don't understand that, go back to the post on the one that Mrs. Garvey wrote. Fire. I think it was the last post that I did. So check that one out. But in other words, the country continues to be economically exploited by interests which are alien to the majority of the ex-colonized population, but are intrinsic to the world capitalist sector. Such a state is in the grips of neocolonialism. It has become a client state. So what is neocolonialism? Neocolonialism, the prerequisite of a correct and global strategy to defeat neocolonialism, is the ability to discover and expose the way in which a state becomes neocolonialist. For although a neocolonialist state enjoys only sham independence, it is to all outward appearance independent, and therefore the very root of neocolonialism must be traced back to the struggle for independence in a colonial territory. Okay, alright. If the liberation movement is firmly established, the colonial powers invariably resort to a containment policy in order to stop any further progress and to deaden its impact. To achieve its objective, the colonial power uses its arsenal of alliances, its network of military bases, economic devices such as corruption, sabotage, and blackmail, and equally insidious, the psychological weapon of propaganda with a view to impressing on the masses a number of imperialist dogmas. One, that Western democracy and the parliamentary systems are the only valid ways of governing, that they constitute the only worthwhile model for the training of an indigenous elite by the colonial power. See, understand that Western democracy and parliamentary systems are part of their propaganda. When you hear our people talking about that, you have to realize that they are repeating the propaganda of the Ascari and the enemies, and it's something that should be fought against. But, of course, this is really complicated, because I remember there's this one sister I know, one sister that she's all about democracy, but she's all about democracy because her nation is under the tyranny of a dictator. You don't want to, so it's like, it's like, whoa, well, if I don't have democracy, if I don't have people power, then we're going to have a terrible dictator. And that's something that you do not want. So, the question begs, well, what kind of situation is that? But again, the dictator is also a part of the neocolonialist regime, so he might not be a part of this propaganda. And this is another example of white people offering solutions that are also problems, And so let's go to the next one. Hold on a second. Yeah. All right. So. Number two, that capitalism, free enterprise, free competition are the only economic systems capable of promoting development, that the Western powers have mastered the liberal capitalist technique perfectly, that the colonial territory should become an economic satellite in its own interest, that there is no reason to put an end to the policy of cooperation pursued during the colonial regime, and that any attempt to break away would be dangerous since the colonial power is always ready to give aid. So this is another propaganda they do, that essentially capitalism is good, but again, capitalism is just the exploitation of the resources. So you want to articulate that to our people, that you do not need other people exploiting your resources. You want to gain mastery of your own resources, and all that comes about with that. And if you were to give the resources to another people, you want to get compensated for it, and because it's in your territory, and you're allowing either your people or another people to be in your territory, so you charge them, you tax them. This is normal functional government. It's basic, but our people are not getting this political education. That's one of the most dangerous things about it. So let's see, number three, that the slightest lapse on the part of the leaders of the liberation movement could push the country into the grip of communism and of totalitarian dictatorship. The slightest lapse on the part of leaders of the liberation movement could push the country. Yeah, and so they're trying to scare you into, oh no, you don't want independence. This is just the psychological tactics, and he's just going through 4 of them. So number 4, that the carve-up agreed upon by the imperialists during the colonial period is fair and sacred, and that it would be unthinkable even to attempt to liberate areas in terms of their common cultural and historical links, that the only acceptable version of liberation must apply to the artificial units designed by the imperialists and hurriedly labeled nations, in spite of the fact that they are neither culturally unified nor economically self-sufficient. So again, this is the borders question. This is the borders question. The borders are fair and sacred, but we don't understand that these are not self-sufficient. They're not even culturally unified. Okay, they were just colonies. They were just economic blocks. They were just, the thing we don't seem to remember, seem to recall, is that white colonial societies went over to Africa, and they were just private corporations, like a Coca-Cola. You understand? Like Coca-Cola, like the equivalent of Coca-Cola. They were going to Africa, and those are the ones that have these nations that we are now bragging about. Coca-Cola said, "Hey, we're gonna go to a area. We're gonna go to an area in this world and just set up, some sort of policing, some sort of, build some roads, try to have some infrastructure for us to bottle Coke, for us to bottle soda, right? Then 100 years later or 200 years later, black people are like, hey, this is my land, this is my country, and it was just to bottle soda." Anyway, so as a further justification of this policy, imperialism usually resorts to all types of propaganda in order to highlight and exploit differences of religion, culture, race, outlook, and of political ideology among the oppressed masses, or between regions which share a long history of mutual commercial and cultural exchange. Let me see if let's see. Let's see if we can read that again. That as further, imperialism usually resorts to all types of propaganda in order to highlight and exploit differences of religion, culture, race, outlook, and of political ideology among the oppressed masses, or between regions which share a long history of mutual commercial and cultural exchange. So they want us to be divided. Obviously, this is going to be some of that socialist rhetoric, But at the end of the day, it's also something that you have to understand, that you, at the end of the day, must fight your enemy. You have to be at war with your enemy, and everything. It's about facts versus information. Facts versus information. Okay, facts can be true, but it might not necessarily be useful. Information means you get information. Yeah, it's a little play on words, but you have to understand. Information means that the goal of it is to get information. Information of what? Information against your enemies. Information to protect your allies. To stand, like I said in this other book that I'm working on. Stand with your allies. Stand against your enemies. Stand on your discipline. Okay, stand on your discipline. And never surrender. But the thing is, you can't, I don't really like these people, and this race, and this religion, and of course I'm not a fan of any other race myself either, but you have to focus on the destruction of your enemies and the empowerment of yourself, and then you can do that other nonsense. But again, you don't even need to do that nonsense. Such methods aim to orientate the leaders of the liberation movement towards a brand of nationalism based on petty-minded and aggressive chauvinism, as well as to steer the liberation movement along a reformist path. The problem of liberation is therefore usually raised in terms of a participation of good indigenous elements in the administration of the colonized territory, for instance, through a policy of Africanization devoid of any fundamental changes in the political, economic, and administrative structure of the territory. So, he's like, look, don't just blindly Africanize everything. Oh yeah, well, we're going to be a more Africanized, colony. Like, that's, no. We got to go back to our culture while you're in the same freaking country. No, you have to look, you're going to have to get information. I'm not Beyonce, but that's what she said, right? How do you edit live videos? I'm joking. Alright, let's go. The transition of neocolonialism is marked by a succession of more or less important measures which culminate into a ritual of so-called free elections, mostly organized through methods of intimidation. Local agents selected by the colonial power as worthy representatives are then presented to the people as the champions of national independence and are immediately given all the superficial attributes of power. A public government has been formed. By the very nature of its essential objective, which is exploitation, neocolonialism can only flourish in a client state. When the farce of sham elections to form a puppet government proved too difficult to enact, the colonial power tries to divide the liberation movement into a moderate wing, which it seeks accommodation, and a militant wing, which it endeavors to isolate and to suppress by force. In the last resort, Neocolonialists can even set up a bogus progressive party or organization using local agents and maintain an artificial liberation movement which serves both as a worthy partner for negotiations and as an intelligence or repression agency against the genuine liberation movement supported by the oppressed masses. Such is the role played by Fling in regard to Guinea-Bissau and UPA in regard to Angola. And so, once more, the stage is set for negotiations, autonomy, and the formation of a puppet government. So, and this is another thing too. I don't know. This could be paranoid. This could be paranoid, but some people might just be more moderate. And this is something you have to realize, that sometimes you think that, hey, the West set up these bugs. The West set up these enemies within our ranks. And sometimes the West is not setting up enemies within our ranks. The reality is that you just have enemies within your ranks. There's this dude, I can't remember his name. He just passed away. He was this I'm guessing a senator or congressman. Oh, John Lewis. I'm in a private, like a private class, if you will. Private class. It's not a political thing. It's let's say it's yoga or something, right? It's a yoga class or a dance class. Let's say it's a dance class. I'm in a private dance class, mind my business, and then this woman just out of nowhere says, "Oh, John Lewis was great. He was excellent. Oh, he was so wonderful." And you're just like, what? Like she's not being paid. She's not an agent. And the thing is that anybody could find these kind of opinions where, yes, black people will praise John Lewis. No, and he's like an accommodationist. He's a liberal. And this is something you have to realize, that sometimes you have to understand that not all your people are into militant, revolutionary warfare. They're not into it. A lot of people aren't into it. Once upon a time, a lot of people that now who might be into it might not have been into it. So it's just fundamental to understand too that sometimes don't even say, hey, the West, understand that as you fight for power, other people will fight for power, and as you fight for power outside of the systems at play, other people may fight for power inside of the systems at play, and you just have to deal with it. You just have to deal with it and act accordingly. And that's that. Let's go. However, the machinations of the colonial power will fail wherever the leaders of the struggle for independence maintain a clear spirit of vigilance and cultivate genuinely revolutionary qualities. Then and only then does a truly independent government emerge, dedicated to a national reconstruction in the liberated territory and determined to assist all those engaged in anti-imperialist struggle. So you have to maintain the spirit of vigilance and revolutionary qualities. Such a government is an obstacle barring the advance of neocolonialism, and such obstacles must be increased because the example of genuine independence is contagious and will help to fortify extensive zones against imperialist aggression. You have to make examples of independence. Make examples of independence. This is what we are lacking as quote-unquote Pan-Africanists, quote-unquote Pan-African Nationalists, quote-unquote Pan-African Federalists, quote-unquote whatever you want to call yourself. You're lacking genuine independence, examples of genuine independence. You have the Maroons, but you were not active for the Maroons. You want to do this stuff. What Garvey did, now Garvey isn't very important. What Garvey did was he had these steamships, he had these boats. What Nkrumah does is he has a whole nation. Okay? They have this, so you have to have these examples. If you don't have these examples, then what are you waiting for? What are you working towards? And you have to figure out where you personally are going to be working. Faced with genuine independence, imperialism is increasingly compelled to resort to encirclement and its subversion in order to overthrow these popular governments, using such weapons as coups d'etats, that's killing, assassination, killing, mutiny within the party, trial revolt, palace revolutions, and so on, while at the same time strengthening neighboring puppet regimes to form a political safety belt, a cordon sanitaire, right? Because, the reality is that you have to act outside of your nation as well. You have to have internal pressures and external pressures. That's what government does, okay? Therefore, the main sphere in which we must strive to defeat neocolonialist intrigues is within the movement for true independence. That is, within the progressive political parties which forms the government. Right? The main sphere in which you must strive to defeat neocolonialist intrigue is within the movements of the true independence, the progressive political party which forms the government. Okay? You have a political party that forms a government. This is what you should have. You should have political parties that are going to enter into government. That's like when I'm thinking about an organization, let's do it. Okay, let's do it. Let's make a political party for African people. This is particularly true in the one-party state, which can only function successfully under socialism. Usually, this ruling party is made up of several groups, each with its distinct economic and political interests. The relative importance of each group in the party and state machinery will determine the course of development. Imperialist strategy is therefore directed towards bringing into a position of preeminence that group which most nearly shares its economic and political views. If a member of a group which is absolutely opposed to imperialism is in control of the state and party, attempts are made to organize either 1. Assassination or coup d'etat or palace revolution, which will permit political power to fall into the lap of the rival but pro-imperialist group, or 2. A decentralization of political power within the ruling party, one group being strong in the state machinery, the other strong in the party machine. Even in the state machine, these vital organs are artfully put into the hands of forces ready to parley with imperialists. The nursing of discontent and confusion within the party and among the people through the spread of conflicting ideologies, rumors of economic rundown, maladministration, and corruption will permit the creation of an atmosphere of dissatisfaction favorable to a change in the personnel of government. Ostensibly, the same party is in power. In truth, a qualitative change in the nature of political power has taken place. So that's really important. That's really important. So let's keep going. Since the conglomerate nature of the ruling party is the basic fact of which neocolonialist strategy depends, the main remedial measure must be directed to the sphere, and this problem must be borne in mind even before the achievement of independence. It is essential that positive action should, in its dialectical evolution, anticipate the seminal disintegration and discover a way of containing the future schematic tendencies. So you have to fight against being divided, and this comes from ideology, a powerful ideology, a powerful mindset, and that's why, that's partly what I'm trying to do. You died like 3 times this year. I don't know. Why are you in a yoga class? Well, I was just masking what I was doing. Look, you can't snitch on yourself, though. Don't give out real information. Give out tangential information. So that people can get the gist of it. But don't give out real information, because then you can be tracked. You got to be on top of everything. You don't want to be tracked, because anytime you're tracked, anybody can. It's easier. Like as somebody told me before. If somebody wants to get you, you have to make them work for it. You don't make it easy for them. You don't say, hey, look, I'm going to be on Main Street and 3rd, at 3 p.m. because then they'll be waiting for you from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. From 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. You just say, hey, I'll be downtown. But go uptown. You know what I'm saying? Go uptown. Let them waste their resources downtown, or just, whatever. Right. Hegemony of international finance capital. It is precisely the increasing dependence of the imperialist system on neo-colonialist exploitation on an international scale which renders its existence so precarious and its future so uncertain. All right, increasing dependence of the imperialist system on neo-colonialist exploitation. It's increasingly dependent on. It's increasingly. The West is increasingly dependent on Africa. Okay, that's it. Significantly, the neo-colonialist system costs the capitalist powers comparatively little, while enormous and increasing profits are made. This is shown by the ever-increasing graphs representing the turnover figures of the big capitalist business concerns implanted in the neo-colonialist areas of the world, and by the ever-widening gap between the wealthy and the poor peoples of the world. In the final analysis, the neo-colonialist system of exploitation, which is the external condition for the maintenance of the capitalist welfare state, remains essentially dependent on the production of the neo-colonialized workers, who must not only continue to produce under stagnant and continually worsened living conditions, but must produce substantially more than they did in the colonial days. They must do more than satisfy the needs of the metropolitan state. They must cater for the insatiable demands of the client government. Okay? America is a welfare state. America is a welfare state, even for the quote-unquote African Americans within. And this is partly why everybody's going to it, because the states that are under neocolonialism are being hyper exploited. This can be broken apart though, but it will require us to get active. We can't. I mean, it's good to read books, because books are going to give you information, going to give you insight, but you can't just read books. The explosive character of this situation cannot be defined. It cannot be denied. The neo-colonialist government is virtually in a state of permanent conflict with its own masses, whilst the gap between the puppet administration and the neo-colonized worker widens every day. It is therefore clear that as a puppet regime cannot draw its strength from the support of the broad masses, it can only stay in power as long as it manages to subsist in the teeth of popular opposition and revolt. Hence, it can only stay in power as long as it manages to subsist in the teeth of the popular opposition and revolt. Hence, the imperative need to depend on a foreign power for military assistance merely to keep the neo-colonized government physically in power. The goal is to have the imperialist powers. I mean, the goal is to like the neocolonial is going to have foreign military assistance, and in order to keep the government physically in power, and these are the governments that you actually this is what you actually have to fight. You understand? When you go to Africa, because sometimes we say repatriation, we don't seem to understand that repatriation does not just mean go and live in Africa. It means get rid of these neo-colonial arms. Okay, get rid of these neo-colonial arms so that our people are no longer exploited and no longer abused and misused. You're going to Africa to fight. Okay? Now there are some nations that you don't have to fight in. There are some nations now. This is why I say it's important that we go to Africa and we make those connections, because a lot of the governments in Africa, or not a lot of the governments, but some governments in Africa may be sympathetic towards you destabilizing a neighboring nation. You understand? But the reality is that you're gonna have to get there and fight, and you're gonna have to understand that this is a complex and complicated situation. But at the end of it all, you'll have freedom. You'll have freedom. You'll have wealth. You'll have your own resources. You will be an adult, a full human being. Well, let's keep going. Thus, the three essential components of neocolonialism are: 1. Economic exploitation; 2. Puppet governments and client states; 3. Military assistance; 4. Economic aid. The vital necessity of military aid is fulfilled through various channels: foreign technical assistance to the armed forces, control of the armed forces by officers and Western military cadres, secret military agreements, the formation of special units for the repression of popular insurrection, and so on. The important thing is to know how to recognize this type of aid in whatever guise it appears, for it is the most blatant proof of the anti-popular, aggressive, and basically violent character of all neo-colonialist regimes. Its escalation and impact increases proportionally to the widening gap between the puppets and the oppressed masses, and is directly related to the development of organized popular resistance. It is also to be noted that U.S. policy found its most complete expression after the murder of President Kennedy and the Johnson Doctrine, whereby military aggression under the name of preventative measures became an integral part of neo-colonial practice. So the struggle against, and that's interesting too, because you see that Johnson is a Democrat. So a lot of times, even I might sound like a Democrat shill, but you see that, the Democrats are a little more savvy and so on and so forth. And so they do look to expand this welfare state. And that expansion of the welfare state is in fact, a detriment to African people. But don't mistake that to say, well, the Republicans who are not looking for a welfare state. No, the thing with that is, just to clarify this, just for anybody who's curious, is that the resources that they do not disperse, so the Democrats may disperse this welfare state. The Republicans may just keep it for the elite to protect themselves against, so it's like there's a sophisticated relationship of the welfare state, and there's the unsophisticated relationship of just hyper exploitation. in your own land, and ensure that that unrealistic. It's complicated. It's complicated. It's very complicated. But like, it's just complicated. The reality is that you just have to, like, you don't have to sweat the internal machinations of America in so much as you just have to sweat, getting rid of the tentacles that are outside of America. The struggle against neocolonialism, military strategy presupposes political aims. All military problems are political, and all political problems are economic. Okay? So again, military strategy presupposes political aims. You have to have political aims. All military problems are political, and all political problems are economic. Both the basic nature of neocolonialism and the accumulated experience of liberation movements in Africa, Asia, and Latin America indicate clearly that the only way for the broad masses to eradicate neocolonialism is through a revolutionary movement springing from a direct confrontation with the imperialists and drawing its strength from the exploited and disinherited masses. The struggle against puppet governments and against all forms of exploitation is the basic condition for the survival and development of a genuine liberation movement in Africa. We must accept the challenge and fight to destroy this threat to our future as a free and united continent. Independence must never be considered as an end in itself, but as a stage, the very first stage of the people's revolutionary struggle. Okay, so propaganda and psychological warfare. Throughout the struggle, we must recognize and combat enemy attempts to demoralize us. For in the face of the failure to achieve military solutions against well-organized, broadly based guerrilla forces, as for example in Vietnam, the enemy has stepped up its efforts in its propaganda war. The aim is, 1, to prevent a liberation movement from getting underway by destroying it at its source, i.e. by undermining the will of the fight. And 2, where revolutionary warfare has actually begun, to conquer it by political means, i.e. by granting just sufficient political, economic, and social reform to encourage all but the so-called extremists to abandon the struggle. Psychological attacks are made through the agency of broadcasting stations like the BBC, Voice of Germany, and above all, Voice of America, which pursues its brainwashing mission through newsreels, interviews, and other informative programs at all hours of the day and night on all wavelengths and in many languages, including special English. The war of words is supplemented by written propaganda using a wide range of political devices such as embassy bulletins, pseudo-revolutionary publications, studies on nationalism and on African socialism, the literature spread by the so-called independent and liberal publishers, cultural and civic education centers, and other imperialist subversive organizations. A lot of the literature that we see are, in fact, propaganda for the Western imperialists. And we know this. We know this. A lot of things that pass for literature is, in fact, like the work of your enemies, either consciously or subconsciously. The paper war penetrates into every town and village and into the remotest parts of the bush. It spreads in the form of free distribution of propaganda films praising the qualities of Western civilization and culture. And those are the films that you enjoy. The Marvel, all that stuff. Those are, propaganda films for the qualities of Western civilization and culture. There are some of the ways, these are some of the ways in which the psychological terrain is prepared. When the target, a certain country or continent, is sufficiently softened, then the invasion of evangelical brigades begins, thus perpetuating the centuries-old tactic whereby missionaries prepare the way for guns. Peace Corps divisions stream in, and moral rearmament units, Jehovah Witnesses, information agencies, and international financial aid organizations. In this way, a territory or even an entire continent is besieged without a single marine in sight. A sprinkling of political and little publicized murders like that of Pau Pinto in Kenya and Mwami and Geneva are used to assist the process. A recent development in the psychological war is the campaign to convince us that we cannot govern ourselves, that we are unworthy of genuine independence, and that foreign tutelage is the only remedy for our wild warlike. And of course, that's not entirely unmerited. Okay, that's not entirely unmerited. Let's see. Africans at home and abroad gotta have a full mind cleansing before we go into any action to change on certain things. Exactly. Exactly. All right. So that's one thing that we this idea that, in fact, we might not be ready to govern ourselves is not too off. The structures of government and all that kind of stuff we do not really as a people contemplate too deeply, and that's something that that's one of the things that we that we or those of us who would be considered intellectuals or whatever, scholars or whatever, should be preparing. This idea of what is a post-emancipation world look like. A lot of us do not, like a lot of the people, like I just saw a video today, I couldn't stomach it, the whole thing, but ladies just talking about what was going on in the 60s and how we, it's like what is the constitution of a free African people? That's the question. What is the constitution of a free African people? If we don't know that, then what are we doing really? But you still have to fight the enemies. But if they are saying you now have a government, you don't have a plan for governing, get a plan for governing. Okay? Imperialism has done its utmost to brainwash Africans into thinking that they need the straitjackets of colonialism and neocolonialism if they are to be saved from their retrogressive instincts, such as the age-old racialist justification for the economic exploitation of our continent. And now the recent military coups engineered throughout Africa by foreign reactionaries are also being used to corroborate imperialism's pet theory that the Africans have shamelessly squandered the golden opportunity of independence, and they have plunged their political kingdoms into blood and barbarism. Therefore, the imperialist mission, we must save them anew, and they heal the Western-trained and Western-bought army puppets as saviors. The press, films, and radio are fast spreading the myth of post-independence violence and chaos. Everywhere, the more or less covert implication is Africa needs to be recolonized. Yeah. So, and the thing is that that was the statement after South Africa, after Mandela was released and became president, that there was an upsurge or an uptick in violence, particularly violence against women and all that kind of stuff. And now I'm wondering, was that even true? Now it might have been true, because again, the misfortune, of course, is that you have to know how to govern yourself. You have to allocate resources towards the policing of your people. You have to allocate the environment. You have to allocate the environment towards the economic prosperity of your people. But if you don't do that, then yeah, there's going to be, you're not going to be able to handle how people act or react in situations of destitution and also limited policing, if you will. And I mean, some people may say, well, wait, no, we don't need any policing. But like the example that you want to bear in mind is what happens if if there's a vehicle transporting money and it's not guarded. Do you expect that no one is going to foment some sort of way to get that money? Of course, and like in some situations, yes, there will be that case where nobody is organized in that sense. But you have to realize that we are, in the event of our independence, we are also previously westernized Africans, and so we might behave like westernized people, and westernized people do like take opportunities to enrich themselves freely, if they can get away with it. And this is something that we see every day. So like that's something that you have to concern yourself with, particularly in the initial stages. So let's go. The fact that Africa has advanced politically more quickly than any other continent in the world is ignored. In 1957, when Ghana became independent and the political renaissance began in Africa, there were only 8 independent states. Now, in just over 10 years, there are over 40, and final liberation of the continent is in sight. The imperialists are not content with trying to convince us that we are politically immature. They are telling us now that we are realizing that armed revolution is the only way to defeat neocolonialism, that we are inherently incapable of fighting a successful revolutionary war. This new psychological propaganda campaign is being waged in various subtle ways. First, there is what we may call the moral argument. Africans are constantly being reminded that they are a peace-loving, tolerant, and communalist-minded people. Again, you see what I want you to read this again, because this is very intrinsic, because this is something that we have been saying among ourselves. And when I did the research, I was like, nope, But this is what we've been saying about some people, that Africans are constantly being reminded that they are peace-loving. Like we're constantly reminding ourselves, oh, we're peace-loving, we're tolerant, and we're communalist-minded people. You know what I'm saying? And that's not true. But let's go. And that African is projected as an individual who has always been loath to shed blood. The corollary of this argument is that it would be immoral and against our nature to engage in revolutionary warfare. But the moral argument is easily destroyed. Centuries of liberation wars, wars of conquest, revolution and counter-revolution in the West were not considered to be moral or immoral. They were simply part of Western historical development. Our armed struggle for freedom is neither moral nor immoral. It is a scientifically, historically determined necessity. Now, I would contend, look, it is actually moral. You know what I'm saying? Like one of the admonitions in Ma'at, okay? One of the admonitions in Ma'at was defend Ma'at, defeat is Fet. Okay? Defend Ma'at, defeat is Fet. And what that means is that it is Fet. You were to fight is Fet. Plain and simple. Let's see what these comments are saying. I don't think a mass exodus is realistic. It will start out gradual and grow exponentially over time. Exactly. You know, the goal is not mass exodus. The goal is the goal is to have a powerful nation state in Africa, and the realization that you as an African want to be a part of that state. You know, you don't need a lot of people in Africa. You don't need, you know, like a lot of people in Africa won't be a part of that state. Okay, but wherever you are in Africa, if you know, if Oni and the rest of us say, hey, over here is our new nation. You come through, you bring that science, you bring that technology, you bring that working ethic, and then we will have a developed nation in Africa. And then guess what? Everyone's going to want to come into that nation. And if we want to expand, we're going to expand. If we want to, you know, like everything is you know, so we don't have to worry about mass exodus, because mass exodus doesn't make, like again, Garvey didn't say mass migration. That was something that they just wanted to use to like diminish his words. We don't have to say, nobody said mass exodus. You know, so don't even like you repatriate. You go and participate in revolutionary warfare. You go and participate in the economic empowerment or the new government, the new state, that kind of stuff. It's not about what everybody should do, because the reality is that a lot of people are not going to move. If your new nation is in West Africa, a lot of people in East Africa are not going to go. A lot of people in West Africa are not going to go. So it's not mass migration. It's just you as an individual seeking political power, seeking self-rule, seeking to have our people no longer exploited by the enemy. Right? Garvey warned us about the enemy's propaganda. That's why he set up his own media and press. Exactly. Yes, we don't ever need to hold mass of black people. We just need enough lion-hearted fighters who are willing to do what it takes when enemy is necessary. You know, exactly. You know, yeah. You know, no mass required. Let's just, you know, let's just work for independence. You know. All right. Let's go. The second argument is used to deflect us from the inevitability of armed struggle in the so-called economy argument. It runs something like this: modern neocolonialism does not constitute a danger to young revolutionary African states, and therefore the military training and arming of the broad masses is an expensive and frivolous enterprise. The corollary of this reactionary argument is, since you cannot, in the present underdeveloped state of your economy, afford the luxury of your own defense, let us take care of it for you, and the trap is set. So, yeah, you know, they want to give you an army, you know. So last but not least, a third series of racialist and defeatist arguments designed to spread the myth that no African revolutionary is capable of carrying an armed struggle through to the end. It condemns a priori all African revolutionary activities to failure. It wraps revolutionary warfare on our continent in an aura of disparagement and tries to cripple us with a sense of inadequacy as freedom fighters. By means of press and radio, accounts are given of the capture of terrorists by security forces. Note the choice of words. The terrorists being usually described as poorly trained, ill-equipped, demoralized, and uncertain of the cause for which they are fighting. Where arms and military equipment are seized, it is always labeled Russia or Chinese to suggest that the freedom fighters who use them are not African nationalists, but the dupes and tools of foreign governments. You see, that's the craftiness of it all. That's the craftiness of hold on a second. Let's see. Yeah, that's the whole thing with regard to the craftiness of the imperialists. The imperialists will tell you, will try to create their own propaganda. So this is one of the most important things, that you have your own network, your own safe line of communication between the masses and your people. And that's the thing that we don't actually already have. So, but let's keep going, because right now, like if you guys didn't hear, they can delete your account on any white platform. They can block your account on any white platform. They can hack your account on any white platform. And so because of that, uh, you know, not just saying go, use a black platform, but that's another thing too. Like, you have to have an infrastructure for warfare, because if you don't have an infrastructure for warfare, essentially you're just going to lose in the fight for your people, because they can, if you're relying on their infrastructure, they can turn it off. Okay, they can turn it off. Right. So let's go. When freedom fighters are captured and tried in courts of law, they are treated as criminals, not as prisoners of war, and are imprisoned, shot, or hanged, usually after so-called confessions have been extorted. This refusal to recognize freedom fighters as soldiers is again part of imperialist strategy designed to pour scorn on the armed revolutionary movement, and at the same time to discourage further recruits. The campaign is based on the counterinsurgency law, whereby it is necessary to attack the revolution during the initial stages of the movement, when it is still weak, when it has not yet fulfilled that which should be its main aspiration, a total integration with the people. Che Guevara. This is why we are, its main aspiration, a total integration with the people. This is why we are being told that Africans are incapable of sustaining revolutionary warfare. A, racially. B, because of our historical background. C, for lack of cadres, ideology, and leadership. Leadership! Okay? In one breath, we are accused of being too primitive to govern ourselves, and in the next, we are accused of not being primitive enough to wage guerrilla warfare. The problem is not whether one is born or is not born a natural revolutionary war fighter. The problem is not whether revolutionaries are naturally suited to Africa or Africa to revolutionary warfare. Predestination of this sort never exists. The fact is that revolutionary warfare is the key to African freedom, and is the only way in which the total liberation of the unity of the African continent can be achieved. Foreign military preparedness. In pursuing the aggressive aims, and fulfilling the requirements of military strategy, the imperialists have built up a system of military blocs and alliances which provide the framework for a pattern of military bases in strategically important positions all over the world. The African freedom fighter, while mainly concerned with enemy strength in Africa, must nevertheless study this world pattern if they are to assess correctly the true dimension of their struggle. The anti-imperialist and neo-colonialist struggle will, in fact, be worldwide. This revolutionary warfare will occur wherever the enemy operates. And this is another thing that's pretty interesting. No, a lot of revolutionary warfare is not going to happen everywhere. It's going to happen on the continent. It's going to happen where you're a majority. So it could happen in the Caribbean, but like in Europe and North America, it's not. You don't expect it. Don't expect it from us. A substantial part of the military anti-revolutionary effort is channeled into four organizations. So NATO is one of the major anti-revolutionary organizations, and that's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, started in 1949. It's the USA, Britain, France, Italy, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, Canada, Iceland, Norway, Denmark, Portugal, since October 1951, Greece and Turkey, and since 1954, West Germany. So look at that though, Belgium, Holland, these are some of these white states, right? SEATO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and you see United States again, in 1954, USA, Britain, France, New Zealand, Australia, Philippines, Thailand, Pakistan. ANZUS, Australia, New Zealand, United States Treaty, and the Pacific Pact. And CENTO, Central Treaty Organization, which is Britain, Turkey, Pakistan, and Iran, emerged from the 1955 Baghdad Pact. USA in 1959 entered into the bilateral defense agreement with Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan. Why is this important? Why is this important? Well, these are the do you have revolutionary organizations across nations? across nations. This is an international organization. It's like, even if you say, hey, I don't want Africa to unite, you want to have these organizations that are pro-revolutionary. That's one thing that you could actually do. All right. In effect, this system of military blocs and alliances enables U.S. imperialism to exert de facto leadership not only over the entire Western world, but over extensive zones in Latin America and Asia. This is achieved through an external network of some 2,200 bases and installations manned by approximately 1 million troops in readiness for war. 1 million troops in readiness for war. Again, 1 million troops in readiness for war. The U.S. external forces of intervention may be grouped as follows. Group 1, against the USSR, with bases in Western Europe, North Africa, and Middle East. Group 2, against China and bases in Pakistan, Southeast Asia, and with bases in Pakistan, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Ocean. And Group 3, against revolutionary movements in Latin America, the Organization of American States, OAS, group with bases in Panama, the Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. In Africa, there are at present 17 air bases owned and operated by members of NATO. There are 9 foreign naval bases. Foreign military missions exist, for example, in Kenya, Morocco, Liberia, Libya, South Africa, Senegal, Niger, Cameroon, Chad, Gabon, and Ivory Coast. In addition, there are 3 rocket sites and an atomic testing range in North Africa. Okay? They got atomic weapons in Africa, and you're not going to do anything about it, right? Or you're not doing anything about it, but you should. The armed forces of foreign powers in various strategically important parts of our continent present a serious threat, but not an insurmountable obstacle in the African revolutionary struggle, for they must be assessed in conjunction with the forces of settler minority governments in Rhodesia and South Africa, and with imperialist forces in the few remaining colonial territories. The formation of NATO led to the signing of the Warsaw Treaty in 1954, by which the Soviet Union, Bulgaria, Hungary, German Democratic Republic, Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, and Albania made arrangements to protect themselves against imperialist aggression. An attack on any one member would be regarded as an attack on all. Provision was made for 1. A political consultative body to take political decisions and to exchange information, and 2. A united military command with headquarters in Warsaw. So this is the need for a Pan-African organization. In comparison, the independent states of Africa are at present militarily weak. Unlike the imperialists and neocolonialists, they have no mutual defense system and no unified command to plan and direct joint action. But this will be remedied with the formation of the All-African People's Revolutionary Army and the setting up of organizations to extend and plan effective revolutionary warfare on a continental scale. So he was saying, let's do this. Let's get those organizations. They have NATO, we need our own thing. And some people may say, hey, why are you just copying Wazungu? That's silly. But remember what Barnes Delaney said. He said, whatever liberty costs the whites, it costs the blacks. So whatever the whites are willing to do to safeguard their liberty, the black people have to be willing to do to safeguard theirs. And that's not everything per se, but you have to realize that a mutual aid society, a mutual defense system is to our benefit. And that's what they have, and that's why they can't necessarily be attacked like that. But you can, but you get that, and then you can't necessarily be attacked like that. And you have to be serious about it, though. So we possess the vital ingredients necessary to win, the full and enthusiastic support of the broad masses of the African people, who are determined once and for all to end all forms of foreign exploitation, to manage their own affairs, and to determine their own future. Against such overwhelming strength organized on a Pan-African basis, no amount of enemy forces can hope to succeed. So we're going to go to chapter 2. This is actually pretty much a lot. Thanks so much for sticking with me. It's going to be, I understand if you can't stick along. Like I said, it's a pretty big book. True that. That's why Garvey says we don't need everybody, because many ain't no good here, and ain't going to be no good there. Exactly. A lot of people, because the thing is this, that, like I said, a lot of people, they're like, hey, I like John Lewis. If you like John Lewis, no. You don't need to be here. If you like people who kowtow to the imperialist regime, you don't need to be in Africa. And again, if you're just going to Africa to have a vacation or whatever, then we're not concerned with you. We're concerned with getting the power back into the hands of our people, and that's really the gist of it. So let's go to the next chapter. Our objectives. So our objectives are defined by three political components of our liberation movement. So one is nationalism, two is Pan-Africanism, and three is socialism. I know you're going to say, what? What? All right. So the three objectives of our struggle stem from our position as people in revolt against exploitation in Africa. These objectives are closely interrelated, and one cannot be achieved fully without the other. If one of the three components is missing, no territory on our continent can secure genuine freedom or maintain a stable government. So, nationalism. Nationalism is the ideological channel of the anti-colonialist struggle and represents the demand for national independence of colonized peoples. It is a concept most easily grasped by the population of territories with a low level of development of productive forces, and therefore of capitalist implantation, and the absence of indigenous elements in the sphere of political power are factors that facilitate the formation of a united military front, one of the primary conditions for a successful liberation movement. Colonized people are not highly differentiated from a social point of view and are exploited practically without discrimination by the colonial powers. Hence the slogan, "The nation must be freed from colonialism," is a universally accepted rallying cry whose influence is heightened by the fact that the agents of colonialism, exploiting the territory from within, are there for everybody to see. It is therefore for the people as a whole who revolt and struggle as a nation class against colonial oppression and who win independence. And this is something important to realize too, that your goal, your objective is to convince the masses to take up arms against their exploiters. Okay? To take up arms against their enemies. So that no, you're not going to Africa just so that you could, storm the palace alone. You will storm the palace with the people, because you want the people to be convinced and convinced to the reality that it's winnable, it's doable, but also it is rewarding. We want to reward our people in this lifetime. We don't want them to just be exploited. And so part of what we have to do is we have to channel that revolutionary mindset. So the nationalist phase is a necessary step in the liberation struggle, but must never be regarded as the final solution to the problem raised by the economic and political exploitation of our people. For nationalism is narrow in its application. It works within the geopolitical framework produced by the colonial powers, which culminated in the carve-up agreed upon in 1884 at the Berlin Conference, where today's political maps of Africa were drawn. The various people of Africa cannot be, and historically never have been, confined behind rigid frontiers, sealing off territories labeled Nigeria, Togo, Senegal, and so on. The natural movements of African people and of these societies have from time immemorial swept along extensive axes, as for example from the Nile to the Congo, from Senegal to the Niger, and from the Congo to the Zambezi. The African nations of today are created artificially by foreigners for their own purposes neither originate from ancient African civilizations, nor do they fit in with our African way of life or habits of exchange. They are not even, for the most part, economically viable, yet they continue to struggle on, each one separately, in a pathetic and hopeless attempt to make progress, while their real obstacle to their development, imperialism, mainly its neocolonial stage, is operating on a Pan-African scale. So they are operating. See, imperialism is operating on a Pan-African scale. You are, and that's really the key. That's like something that you like. That should be a quote, So I'm gonna write that, Let's see. Alright. So let's go. Let's see. Let's go back. I'm actually pretty thirsty. But alright. Already, huge zones of Africa has been integrated economically in the exclusive interest of international finance capital. A study of the organizations and workings of most of the large trading firms, mining trusts, and industrial cartels operating in Africa shows that they all function directly or indirectly on a continental scale. Many of them form parts of a general network spreading over several continents. This monopolistic system of exploitation is the direct outcome of prolonged capitalist practice, the experience being that extended and unified industrial, commercial, or mining units are less costly to maintain, are more efficient, and produce higher profits. It is time that we also plan our economic and political development on a continental scale. The concept of African unity embraces the fundamental needs and characteristics of African civilization and ideology, and at the same time satisfies all the conditions necessary for an accelerated economic and technological advance. Such maximum development will ensure a rational utilization of the material resources and human potential of our continent along the lines of an integrated economy and within complementary sectors of production, eliminating all necessary forms of competition, economic alienation, and duplication. The idea is not to destroy or dismantle the network of foreign mining complexes and industrial companies throughout Africa, but to take them over and operate them in the sole interest of the African peoples. So the idea is not to destroy and dismantle this network of foreign businesses, but to take them over. Finally, the limitations of nationalism may be seen in the experience of countries which have succeeded in casting off one imperialism only to be oppressed by another, or by a syndicate of imperialism, as in Latin America. Merely to change masters is no solution to colonial poverty or neo-colonialist strangulation, even if exploitation is subsequently practiced in a more subtle way. So African unity gives an indispensable continental dimension to the concept of the African nation. Pan-Africanism. The limitations of nationalism have already been acknowledged by the most mature leaders of the liberation movement. But wherever the conditions for the transition to a higher ideological level and a wider form of struggle were lacking, the necessary leap could not be made, and nationalism was never transcended. The true dimension of our struggle were outlined at the 5th Pan-African Congress held in Manchester, England in 1945, when resolutions were passed specifying that the supreme objective of the national liberation movement was to pave the way to national reconstruction and to promote democracy and prosperity for the broad masses through an all-African struggle against colonialism and an all-new manifestation of imperialism. No reference is made to neocolonialism as such, because this only developed on a massive scale in Africa after 1957. But the Pan-Africanism which found expression, and that's what I'm saying. You see that the democracy claim, that was meanwhile he said that was something that we shouldn't have promoted. Massive scale in Africa after 1957. But the Pan-Africanism, which found expression at the Manchester Congress 1945, and the All-African People's Conference 1958, was based on the age-old aspiration towards unity of all peoples of African origin exploited as workers and as a race. African unity therefore implies that imperialism and foreign oppression should be eradicated in all its forms, and 2, that neocolonialism should be recognized and eliminated, and 3, that the new African nation must develop within a continental framework. However, the specific content of the new social order within the developing African nation remains to be defined. So socialism, let's look at socialism. At the core of the concept of African unity lies socialism and the socialist definition of the new African society. Socialism and African unity are organically complementary. Socialism implies common ownership of the means of production, distributed in exchange. Production is for use and not for profit. Planned methods of production by the state based on modern industry and agriculture. And political power in the hands of the people, with the entire body of workers possessing the necessary governmental machinery through which to express their needs and aspirations. It is a concept in keeping with the humanist and egalitarian spirit which characterized traditional African society, though it must be applied in the modern context. All are workers and no person exploits another. And 4, application of scientific methods in all spheres of thought and production. So this is interesting because, I'm not really a huge fan of socialism. So let's actually just look at this a little deeper. Common ownership of means of production, distribution and exchange. Production is for use and not for profit. So this is pretty interesting. So this is more anti-capitalism. You have to realize that sometimes people oppose socialism and anti-capitalism as the same thing. Common ownership. We have to digest what does common mean. What does common mean per se. And that's another thing too that we have to realize. Okay, so here's the thing about Africa and capitalism and all that. If you go back to like I said, there are models for power. Kemet was one of the older models for power that we kind of base everything off of. In Kemet, you had a leadership class. Okay, you had a leadership class. This is why you don't go by the worker. You don't actually submit to the worker, which is a socialist model. You submit to the leadership class that are educated and trained to uphold Ma'at. Workers are not necessarily educated and trained to uphold Ma'at. And because workers are not necessarily held to that standard, it doesn't really make any sense to hand the means of production, the means of property, the so on and so forth, or to think that that in and of itself would avoid exploitation. You know, what avoids exploitation is a moral, spiritual grounding. Okay, what makes for an end to exploitation is an acceptance of an African culture, African reciprocity. That's not necessarily what a worker goes through. Okay, it's not necessarily what a worker goes through, and I think that's actually one of the best ways to articulate why this is kind of just like, what are you talking about? You know, you want to focus on having a leadership class, foremost. Power in the hands of the people. Like, what people? You know, the entire body of workers. Why is that even necessary? You know, it just complicates and slows down a process that otherwise could just be about my eye and be right. You know, just be about my eye and be right. So let's go. Socialism must provide a new social synthesis in which the advanced technical society is achieved without the appalling evils and deep cleavages of capitalist industrial economy. Socialism become a necessity in the platform direction of African political leaders, though not all pursue really socialist policies. We must therefore be on our guard against measures which are declared to be socialist, but which do not in fact promote economic and social development. An example of muddled thinking about socialism is the attempt made in recent years to suggest the existence of an African socialism peculiar to our continent. There's only one true socialism, and that is scientific socialism. So you see what I'm saying? Like, so yes, I mean, a few days ago, I was in a Discord, a separate Discord. Although you could join my Discord, but separate Discord where we were discussing socialism, and someone was saying, no, we want to have African socialism. We want to have socialism in Africa. We want African socialism, and it's like, even Nkrumah, study gentleman, he says, look, there's only one true socialism, that is scientific socialism. That's Marxism, the principles of which are abiding and universal. The only way to achieve it is to devise policies aimed at general socialist goals, which take their form from the concrete, specific circumstance and condition of a particular country at a definite historical period. The socialist countries of Africa may differ in the details of their policies. There are different paths of socialism, and adjustments have to be made to suit particular circumstances, but they should not be arbitrarily decided or subject to vagaries of taste. They must be scientifically explained. Only under socialism can we really reliably accumulate the capital we need for our development, ensure that the gains of investment are applied to the general welfare, and achieve our goal of a free and united continent. The present stage of the liberation struggle. An objective appraisal of the degree of success so far attained in our struggle leads to the consideration of three theses of major importance. 1. The achievement of genuine independence by an African state is but a part of the overall process of continental decolonization. Okay, that's just a part. 2. No independent state is immune to imperialist intrigue, pressure, and subversion as long as imperialism, under any guise, is left free to operate on the African continent. And of course, this is an overstatement. This is one of the problems with Pan-Africanism, to be honest, is that we're assuming that, hey, even one little part, if one thing is left out, then all of us are in danger. And it's not necessarily the case. What you want to have is a powerful African nation. You know what I mean? Like when it comes to America, United States of America, North America, they have a powerful European nation. Okay? They don't have the whole continent. They don't have Mexico. They don't have Canada. But they have a powerful European nation. That's what you want. A powerful African nation. And if there's exploitation, if Britain or France exploits Mexico, that's fine. If Britain or France exploit Canada, that's fine. The important thing is that you will be in the United States. Or in the case of Africa, you will be in the nation we form, and the people, and you'll have your borders open for the people in neighboring nations. You know what I mean? And then when they want to, take over the neighboring nations, yeah, sure. I mean, if necessary. Of course, it doesn't have to be like a hostile takeover. You have two examples, at least. You have Guinea-Bissau, which used to be two countries, and you have Tanzania, which was Zanzibar and Tanganyika. So you have these examples of neighboring nations coming together and working together, getting equal sovereignty and equal benefits, equal nationality, and that's what we have to understand. And they did it peacefully, and we could do it again. We can do this, and save our people, help our people, and that's what it's going to be about. But it's not about having the whole continent. It's not about having all African people. It's about having a powerful African nation, and then spreading accordingly. But you have to be on point. You have to be open. That's the part of pan. That's the part that I say is Pan-African. All right. The degree of completeness of our victory over imperialism has a determining influence on how far post-independence reconstruction can go. In other words, the people will have no equitable share in national reconstruction and its benefits unless the victory over imperialism in its colonialist and neo-colonialist stages is complete. It therefore follows that the unity of African people expressed in the Union government is necessary. A. To accelerate the liberation struggles in territories still under colonial domination. B. For the security of already independent states, and particularly for those of which have chosen to follow a line of total opposition to imperialism. 3. To protect the flanks of our drive towards socialist domestic reconstruction, and these considerations should be able to serve as 1. A basic formula to link up with all aspects of anti-imperialist struggle in Africa, 2. A blueprint for the people's actions, and 3. A yardstick for the evaluation of political development and phases in the history of Africa. Accumulated experience of the Africa People's Unity Movement. Equipped with a clear knowledge of our objectives, we are in a position to undertake a critical appraisal of recent developments in African history. This is necessary if we are to draw positive lessons from past experiences, to determine both the area of deviation and the need for correction, and to devise a more effective strategy for the future. Shortly after Ghana achieved independence in 1957, there began a rapid succession of events caused by great upsurge of the interest in the African people's movement toward emancipation and unity. The 3 most significant events which sparked off the process were: 1. The first conference of independent African states held in Accra in April 1958. At the time, there were only 8 independent states: Ethiopia, Ghana, Liberia, Libya, Morocco, Sudan, Tunisia, and Egypt. The purpose was to A. discuss questions of mutual interest, B. explore ways and means of consolidating and safeguarding independence, C. strengthen the economic and cultural ties between the independent states, and D. find way of helping Africa still oppressed under colonial rule. The African leaders in attendance were resolutely and unanimously anti-imperialist and agreed to coordinate diplomacy mainly at UN level. Pan-African conferences had hitherto been held overseas. In 1958, Pan-Africanism had moved to the African continent where it really belonged. 2. The All-African People's Conference held in Accra of December 1958. Representatives of 62 African nationalist organizations attended and discussed the various aspects of the liberation movement. The organization of unitary action between African political movements was then launched. And 3, and of course, if you don't know this, there was recently I guess a 60-year anniversary for that. All right, so the number 3, the third All-African People's Conference held in Cairo in March 1961, when the whole question of neocolonialism was brought to the forefront in discussions of the African revolutionary struggle. The development of unitary anti-imperialist action between struggling peoples and at the level of governments of independent states constituted a 2-pronged attack against imperialism. The imperialists acted accordingly, A. through diplomatic pressure, and B. by granting sham independence to a number of states. The trick worked well. However, a clear prefiguration of the later events was to be enacted at the Sankofa Conference held in Liberia in July 1959. 2 views were expressed on the question of African unity. The first advocated the tightest binding together of our forces in political unity, while the second was in favor of a formula flexible enough to enable each state to safeguard its national sovereignty and personal identity. Yeah, I'm actually ridiculously thirsty, so I'm probably going to grab some water at the end of this paragraph, at the end of these 2 paragraphs. The latter view fitted in only too well with the objective of the imperialists, who had already recognized the need to adapt their policies to the changing colonial situation. Hard pressed by the armed struggle of the FLN in Algeria, and to avoid any further crystallization of revolutionary awareness among extremist African leaders, they decided to play their own version of nationalism. Accordingly, between 1959 and 1960, 13 independent states emerged, 11 former French colonies, and Congo Leopold and Leopoldville and Nigeria. A close analysis of the specific conditions under which each one of the 13 states became independent reveals that neocolonialism was incipient during the movement for independence and emerged fully once independence was acquired. So they have, like, neocolonialism was working and operating in these 13 nations between 1959 and 1960, but only really fully manifested afterward. And I guess, again, like I say, this could be partially, a paranoia. But again, I'm gonna try to get some water, because I'm actually hurting my head. I'll be right back. Okay. That's interesting. Okay, that's interesting. Alright, let's go back to this reading. So sham independence and the unity movement. So few were deceived by such a deliberate and obvious stratagem. Imperialism was merely using the device of sham independence to prepare the African terrain to suit its own convenience and to avoid a direct and costly confrontation with the liberation movements. It was therefore not surprising that the divisions of opinion on the question of unity expressed at Sankofa were much more in evidence during the second conference of the independent African states held in Addis Ababa in 1960. At the conference, the pivot of African unity was seen no longer as a firm political union, but merely as a loose policy of cooperation between African states. Moreover, the concept of regional groupings between states was endorsed. The principle of a collective foreign policy. Number two, the principle of a collective foreign policy, as agreed upon in Accra in 1958, gave way to the principle of a separate foreign policy for each state. In this way, imperialists gained more room for maneuver, for infiltration, and for stirring up difficulties between African states. Number three, it was agreed that assistance to the Algerian liberation struggle was to take the form of diplomatic pressure on France, but was to bypass official recognition of the GPRA, the Algerian Provisional Government. In plain words, diplomatic shilly-shallying was to take the place of a genuine anti-imperialist confrontation. Therefore, as early as 1960, a wide gulf developed between those independent states which favored cooperation with imperialism and those which proclaimed an unflinching offensive against it. The emergence of conflicting trends was not fortuitous, but a logical consequence of the state of tension between qualitatively different situations. So there were, one, genuine independence, the product of mass political movement or an armed liberation struggle, okay? And then two, the sham independence, which is established by imperialists in an attempt to arrest the progress of the people's movement through the betrayal of its essential objectives. So it is important to note that it was not the moderate policy of cooperation with imperialism which created the moderate African states. On the contrary, it was the deliberate creation of such states by imperialism which gave rise to moderation and cooperation. The will to compromise is but a reflection at a diplomatic level of the neo-colonialist character of certain African states. It is an external manifestation of the inner characteristics of neo-colonial regimes. So African People's War and imperialist escalation. However, far from weakening the anti-imperialist struggle and the vanguard revolutionary states, such measures can only strengthen their vigilance and revolutionary determination. Since 1960, the struggle of the African people and the more or less latent state of crisis inside many African territories has reached maturity. To counterbalance the growing revolutionary character of the African situation, the enemy's reaction has become more open and direct. Both the Algerian and the Congolese wars were born of the people's determination to free themselves at whatever cost. The only difference between the Algerian revolt developed in essentially a colonial context, whereas the Congolese struggle is being waged in a neo-colonialist setting, marked by major imperialist aggression throughout the African continent. From a practical point of view, the difference between the various segments of the liberation struggle in time and space are minimal. The only factor which rendered the Congolese, Angolese, or Rhodesian struggle, to take these examples only, more violent than others are, first, the escalation of imperialist action, and secondly, the more advanced nature of the people's organization. Though the actual level of readiness to revolt may be just as high elsewhere. Significantly, it was the frenzy of imperialist repression against the Algerian and Congolese liberation struggles which led to the calling of the Casablanca Conference in 1961, to which the GPRA was invited. The Casablanca states, as they were subsequently named, i.e. Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Libya, Egypt, Morocco, and the Algerian FNL, called for decisive actions on the part of the independent states to support the anti-imperialist struggle in Africa. Further, a strong appeal for unity was made, for in unity lies strength. African states must unite or sell themselves out to imperialists and colonialist exploiters for a mess of pottage, or disintegrate individually. Meantime, two new groupings alike in content but similar policies were being formed. Monrovia Group, which met in Monrovia in May 1961, consisting mainly of English-speaking states whose loyalties were basically Anglo-American. The Brazzaville Group, made up of French-speaking states mostly aligned to France. Okay, so again, there's the Casablanca, the Monrovia, and the Brazzaville, and yeah. Okay. But these groups adopted a go-slow attitude towards African emancipation and unity, and pursued a policy of conciliation with imperialism. Their views were expressed at the Lagos Conference, January 1962, when 20 of Africa's 28 states, independent states, met to discuss ways in which cooperation could be achieved. They agreed that A, the absolute sovereignty and legality of each African state must be respected. B, the union of one state with another should be effected on a voluntary basis. C, there should be non-interference in each other's affairs. And D, political refugees from one state should not be given asylum in another state. So this is all big, big, big. This is big, okay? This is big. Because my thing is this too. I was actually under the impression that this is something that Nkrumah agreed to. Because the thing is that Nkrumah violates. You can't see me pointing. Well, I guess you can see me pointing. You just can't see me pointing yet. But Nkrumah was let us see. Nkrumah was in violation of this non-interference in other nations. In other nations' affairs. But it looks like he's never agreed to it anyway. But like pursuing sovereignty, like A is actually the division of African states. And the thing is this too, like again, you want to have a mega state. You probably don't want to rush into, like essentially what Nyerere was saying. Hey, look, let's have an East African Federation. Let's have an East African nation, like a larger East African nation. That was actually intelligent. But Nkrumah sabotages it. Okay? Nkrumah sabotages it because he's like, no, it's either all Africa or nothing. You can't have a large superpower in the middle of Africa. But it's like, no, that's exactly what you wanted to have. So, I'm not really all for Nkrumah as much as, like I said, I like Nyerere better. But again, this is actually really important right here. So the union of one state with another should be effected on a voluntary basis. So it's like, and this is something that, like, you want the unity of all nations. You don't want it to be on a voluntary basis. You don't want it to be on a voluntary. I mean, but that's the thing though. It's sovereignty. You see what I'm saying? It's sovereignty, so it would be on a voluntary basis. And the political refugees being turned into the other ones, like that is in itself another example of it violates B. You understand? It violates B. Like D and B are actually contradictory. So it's like it's setting up. This situation was setting up for mini dictatorships, for the destruction. We're setting up. The Lagos Conference was setting up for the destruction of black people. It was a setup. North Africa was unrepresented at the Lagos Conference because the Algerian provisional government was not invited. Hold on a second. Something. Shoot. Hold on a second. The pages. Okay. North Africa was unrepresented at the conference. Okay. North Africa was unrepresented at the Lagos Conference because the Algerian provisional government was not invited. The Casablanca powers in the Sudan also declined to go for the same reason. Imperialist diplomacy appears to have achieved its purpose admirably in splitting up the independent states of Africa into separate and conflicting groups. The efforts of the militant Casablanca group were checked by a pro-imperialist bloc, which was in turn subdivided into pro-French and pro-English branches. So they did it. You see what I'm saying? Like I said, they they divided up Africa. They divided up Africa. The imperialists did it. So the Organization of African Unity (OAU), the militant African forces did achieve a certain amount of success when all blocs and groups joined together to form the OAU at Addis Ababa in 1963. However, appearances are sometimes deceptive. The dissolution of pro-imperialist groups did not mean that the interests they represented had also vanished. Let me just make sure my camera. Okay, I'm just leaving a little bit too much. Let's go. Alright. On the contrary, an examination of recent events exposes serious weaknesses within the OAU. The organization failed to solve the crisis in the Congo and Rhodesia, both of them test cases, the former involving a direct challenge to neocolonialism, and the latter open confrontation with a minority settler government. In fact, the OAU is in danger of developing into a useful cover for the continued sterile action of conflicting interests, the only difference being that it is the context of one big brotherly organization. Reactionary tactics are camouflaged and applied through the subtleties of negotiation. This change of tactics works as strongly as ever against the fundamental interests of progressive forces in Africa, since it hides concessions to imperialism. Negotiations are conducted behind closed doors and surrounded by a mysterious cloak of diplomatic protocol, marking knowledge of the proceedings inaccessible to the general public. However, 4 explosive issues discussed in the OAU conference in Accra in 1965 alerted progressive opinion to the danger of continued compromise. 1. The crisis in Rhodesia. 2. The struggle in the Congo. 3. The treatment of African political refugees. And 4. Problem of Southwest Africa. In the first case, the African heads of state failed to agree on a particular way of checking Ian Smith's rebellion and instead fell back on the futile policy of negotiations with Britain, combined with diplomatic pressure at international and UN level. Similarly, in the Congo, the fundamental issue of the crisis was avoided in spite of the tense situation resulting from the gallant stand of the freedom fighters carrying on the struggle of the spirit of Lumumba. On the question of the status and treatment of African political refugees, the OAU again failed to find a solution, and heads of states continued to regard them merely as outlaws or bartered goods. The radical African states in the OAU were confronted with the difficulty of finding effective expression for the aspirations of the broad masses of the people. The struggle seemed to unfold in 2 different spheres, the one in the streets, villages, workshops, and factories, and the other in the hushed and closed atmosphere of air-conditioned houses and offices. In this situation, the genuine threat of imperialism and its neocolonialist agents tended to be underestimated, and the progressive states placed too much reliance on the OAU. In the meantime, the pro-imperialist states, although pretending to rally to the revolutionary elements within the OAU in order to avoid a direct confrontation, have been creating and expanding an organization after their own heart. The Organisation Commune Africaine et Malgache, OCAM, into a larger unit to include all French-speaking African states under the name Francophonie. As a result, the progressive states, failing to close their ranks, were left to fight inadequately and alone against the massive escalation of imperialism and the active consolidation of its position through plots and a series of coups d'etats. This is very important because you have to realize that if you have something that's making you a lot of money, okay, if you have a business that's making you a lot of money, and then the workers of the business try to take it from you, you try to keep it. And so, in a scale of nations, you have nations that are trying to back away from France or back away from Britain. And France and Britain are going to work to keep it because it's making them a lot of wealth. It's making them a lot of wealth, especially with the people divided. It's making them a lot of wealth, so they have to work for it. And so, you have to expect conflict, expect conflict. So some essential features of the enemy's offensive. One, externally, a mounting imperialist aggression in Africa foreshadows a decline in the strength of imperialism, since the use of violence to maintain imperialist rule invariably sparks off a stronger explosion of revolutionary activity among oppressed peoples, and experience has shown that such movements can be neither destroyed nor contained. The American fiascos in Vietnam, Santo Domingo, and Cuba illustrate the point. So also do the resolutions condemning U.S. imperialism passed by representatives from 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, when they met in conference in Havana in 1966. Taken aback by the compelling reality of tri-continental solidarity, the U.S. imperialists hastened to condemn the Havana Resolution as subversive and resolved to take appropriate preventative measures, including military action against any popular movement considered to be a danger to the free world under U.S. leadership. Okay? At the same time, they predicted other coups in Africa during the ensuing year, and immediately set to work with or without the collaboration of European accomplices to help this prediction to come true. It is evidently felt that the resort to quick action was necessary because of the uncompromising stand against imperialist action in the hot zones of the world taken by progressive governments. The latter were succeeding in arousing world opinion against imperialist atrocities in Vietnam and in drawing attention to the worsening crisis in Rhodesia and the Congo, the South African military buildup, NATO's assistance to Portugal in her colonial wars, and interventions in Latin America and the Caribbean. So, internally, the capitalist imperialist states face serious economic and social difficulties. Rising prices, balance of payments problems, widespread and repeated strikes are only a few of the symptoms of the general malaise in the United States. The grave domestic situation is aggravated by the massive counterattacks of the African American revolutionaries. Almost everywhere behind the smoke screens, the social and economic situation is unhealthy, and particularly in the second-class capitalist states. And these mounting economic crises means heavier and heavier dependence on the exploitation of the peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Okay, so so that's actually pretty interesting. So here, Nkrumah is saying, look, the African American revolutionaries are doing well, are doing well to attack, the United States, for instance, in so much as, again, it just divides them. It divides their focus, divides the American focus, and that's really like part of it too, and that's also part of, if you will, that's part of the like why you might even encourage these white folk, these white rebels and all that, because it's just divide and conquer. It's divide and conquer. You want to divide these white people, so that's really important. So the need for self-critical objective diagnosis. If imperialists are faced with so many external and domestic difficulties, how then can they afford to step up their aggression in Africa? To answer this question, it is necessary to examine the internal factors which make our continent so vulnerable to attack, and particularly to look closely at the whole question of African unity, for this lies at the core of our problem. So there are 3 conflicting conceptions of African unity which explain to a larger extent the present critical situation in Africa. The mutual protection theory, that the OAU serves as a kind of insurance against any change in the status quo, membership providing a protection for heads of state and government against all forms of political action aimed at their overthrow. Since most of the leaders who adhere to this idea owe their position to imperialists and their agents, it is not surprising that this is the viewpoint which really serves the interests of imperialism, where the puppet states are being used both for short-term purposes of exploitation and as springboards of subversion against progressive African states. Again, you see what I'm saying? You have to realize, and this is important, because you're saying, a lot of us are like, oh, we like the OAU. The OAU is there to protect those who are subverting and those who are exploiting the progressives and African people in general, right? So again, this is complicated. Number 2, the functional conception. that African unity should be purely a matter of economic cooperation. Those who hold this view overlook the vital fact that African regional economic organizations will remain weak and subject to the same neo-colonial pressures and domination as long as they lack overall political cohesion. Without political unity, African states can never commit themselves to full economic integration, which is the only productive form of integration able to develop our great resource fully for the well-being of the African people as a whole. Furthermore, the lack of political unity places inter-African economic institutions at the mercy of powerful foreign commercial interests, and sooner or later they will use such institutions as funnels through which to pour money for the continued exploitation of Africa. So, number 3, the political union conception, that a union government should be in charge of economic development, defense, and foreign policy, while other government functions would continue to be discharged by the existing states grouped in federal fashion within a gigantic central political organization. Clearly, this is the strongest position Africa could adopt in the struggle against modern imperialism. So I guess he likes this one. Yeah, so he likes political union. Alright, so he says that's the strongest. However, any sincere... So that's again the Federation. That's what you really want. However, any sincere critical appraisal of past activities and achievements of the OAU would tend to show that, as it is now constituted, the OAU is not likely to be able to achieve the political unification of Africa. This is obviously why imperialists, although against the idea of political union, will do nothing to break the OAU. It serves their purpose in slowing down revolutionary progress in Africa. This state of affairs is mirrored both in the discouragement of freedom fighters in the remaining colonial territories and South Africa, and in the growing perplexity among freedom fighters from neo-colonized territories. The struggle for African continental union and socialism may be hampered by the enemy within. Those who declare their support for the revolution at the same time by devious means serve and promote the interests of imperialism and neo-colonialism. Okay? Those are the enemies within. The examination of recent events in our history and our present condition reveal the urgent need for a new strategy to combat imperialist aggression, and this must be devised on a continental scale. Either we concentrate our forces for a decisive armed struggle to achieve our objectives, or we will each fall one by one to the blows of imperialism in its present stage of a desperate offensive. Okay, so this is book 2 now. So we're going to go into strategy, tactics, and techniques. So, thank you for staying with me. I know it's a lot, but, thanks for staying with me. This is actually a pretty interesting book. And this might be a long recording, so, like I said, if you need to take a break, you can take a break. I can't, obviously, but whatever. Strategies, tactics, and techniques. Preface. The revolutionary warfare is the logical, inevitable answer to the political, economic, and social situation in Africa today. We do not have the luxury of an alternative. We are faced with a necessity. And so this is something that we have to realize. This is something that, like I said, this is the reality. That revolutionary warfare is still the logical, inevitable answer to the political, economic, and social situation in Africa today. It's still so. Okay? So throughout the world... Actually, let me actually post this in the... Let me actually post this in the chat. Like, that's it. Alright. Where are we? Throughout the world, the escalation of imperialist aggression is making the issue clear, and exploitation can no longer be disguised. In Africa, a point of explosion... in Africa... A point of explosion against imperialism has been reached, but only a massive and organized will to fight can spark it off. Time is running out. We must act now. The freedom fighters already operating in many parts of Africa must no longer be allowed to bear the full brunt of a continental struggle against a continental enemy. The collective and continental nature of our will and our space, the urgency of conquering the initiative, and the protracted nature of revolutionary war calls for a united all-African organization of all freedom fighters on the African continent. We must coordinate strategy and tactics and combine experience Coordination requires organization. Organization can only be effective if each fighting unit is a disciplined part of the whole. Attack must be planned with diversion, retreat with consolidation, losses in one zone compensated for by gains in another, until the liberation movement is finally victorious and the whole of Africa is free and united. As a continental nation, we are young, strong, and resilient. The cohesive planning of our struggle and the combined strength of our will to win will do the rest. Africa is one, and this battle must be fought and won continentally. So chapter 1, Organization for Revolutionary Warfare. So it's really important to realize too that that sometimes what we call a coup is revolutionary warfare. You understand? So like part of it is that you actually do want to have coups in Africa. You just don't want it to be coups by, I mean, let's just use the word coons, right? Anyway, but yeah, you could say Askari. I don't really like racialized terms like coon, but you know, it's just coon. Come on. It was a low ball. All right, so A, the military balance. So the dimension of our struggle is equal to the size of the African continent itself. It is in no way confined within any of the absurd limits of the microstates created by the colonial powers, and jealously guarded by imperialist puppets during the Neo-Colonialist period. For although the African nation is at present split up among many separate states, it is really simply divided into two, our enemy and ourselves. And that's what it is. Like, at the end of the day, you have to say to yourself, we as let's say Ancobia, right? We as Ancobia have to decide between whether the nation is going to be like divide Africa into two. Like, who are the Askari, who are the enemies, and who are the Ancobia, who are the warriors who are our race. You know, the strategy of our struggle must be determined accordingly, and our continental territory considered as consisting of three categories of territories which correspond to the varying levels of popular organization and to the precise measure of victory attained by the people's forces over the enemy. So there is 1, the liberated areas, 2, the zones under enemy control, and 3, the contested zone, that's hot point. So you're going to have these 3. So liberated areas are these areas may present minimal differences due to the varying ways in which independence was obtained. However, they can be collectively defined as territories where independence was secured through an armed struggle or through positive action movement representing the majority of the population under the leadership of an anti-imperialist and well-organized mass party. So those are the 2 ways to go about, you know, getting these liberated zones in Africa. That is armed struggle or a massive political party, generally, right? So a puppet regime was overthrown by or this is another way actually. A puppet regime was overthrown by a people's movement, i.e. Zanzibar, Congo, Brazzaville, and Egypt. C, social revolution is taking place to consolidate political independence by 1, promoting accelerated economic. Oh shit. Let me see. Hold on a second. Promoting accelerated economic development, improving workers' conditions, and 3, establishing complete freedom from dependence on foreign economic interests. It therefore follows that a liberated zone can only be organized by a radically anti-imperialist party whose duty is to A, to decolonize, and B, to teach the theory and practice of socialism as applied to the African social milieu and adapted to local circumstances. Here he goes with the socialism again, right? But anyway, these people's socialist parties take the necessary steps to transform the united but heterogeneous front which fought for independence into an ideologically monolithic party of cadres. Thus, in a truly liberated territory, one can observe 1, political growth achieved as a result of discussion and agreements concluded within the party. 2, steady progress to transform theory into practice along the ideological lines drawn by the party. And 3, constant improvements, checking and rechecking of the development plans to be carried out by the party and at state levels. 4, political maturity among party members who are no longer content to follow a vague and general line of action. Revolutionary political maturity is the prelude to the reorganization of the party structure along more radical lines. However, no territory may be said to be truly liberated if the party leadership, apart from consolidating the gains of national independence, does not also undertake to a. support actively the detachment of revolutionary liberation movements in the contested zones of Africa, b. contribute to the organization and revolutionary practice of the people's forces in neo-colonialist states, i.e. in zones under enemy control or in contested areas, and c. effect an organic liaison of its political and economic life with the other liberated zones of the African nation. So you have liberated zones, and you have to focus on that. This implies a system of mutual servicing and aid between the various attachments of the liberation movements and the liberated zones, so that a continuous exchange of experience, advice, and ideas will link the progressive parties in power with the parties struggling in the contested zones. Each liberated zone should be ready to offer the use of its territories to detachments of the liberation movement, so that the latter may establish their rear bases on friendly soil and benefit from the provision of communications, hospitals, schools, factories, workshops, etc. It is important to bear in mind that a liberated area is constantly exposed to the many forms of enemy action and attack. It is the duty of both the liberation movement and the liberated zones: 1. To make objective and up-to-date analysis of the enemy's aggression. 2. To take action to recapture any base lost to the enemy and to help correct the mistakes which enabled the enemy to gain temporary victory. And in fact, the liberated areas of Africa do not yet come fully up to all the standards required of them. For example, in certain liberated zones, the level of economic liberation is clearly inferior to the high level of revolutionary awareness, but the main criterion for judging them to be liberated is the actual direction in which they are moving, since our assessment is of changing, not static phenomena. So you already see what he's saying. Basically, that the liberated zones are not necessarily up to par with what, like, his standard per se, but it's not about what you are. It's there's this drama between the being and becoming, okay? And sometimes somebody is becoming something, or something is becoming something, even if they're not being it, and that's really just what it is. So there's zones under enemy control. So the imperialists control such zones. A. Through an administration manned by foreigners, the territory is then externally subjected. B. Through a puppet government made up of local elements, the territory is both internally and externally subjected. Or C. Through a settler minority government. On this territory, settlers have established the rule of majority by a minority. There is no logic except the right of might that can accept such a situation. The predominant racial group must and will provide the government of a country. Settlers, provided they accept the principle of one man, one vote, a majority rule may be tolerated, but settler minority governments never. They are a dangerous anachronism and must be swept away completely and forever. So he's looking at South Africa. He's looking at you. He's looking at South Africa. So a territory under enemy control, therefore, is governed against the interest of the majority. And see, this is another thing too. See, because he's saying settler government. The issue is this. I want you to explain this. I want you to understand this. That America, if in the imagination of the African American, right, they will set up a settler government in America, and it's really unlikely. But it's also not something that that most people even would attest to. You know, that white people are the majority is no question. Like traditionally white groups would be 200 million people, whereas which is about outnumbering African Americans, who are maybe 40 million by actually, let me look that up though, by 5 to 1. You know, usually I count everybody who's not black, and in which case it would be 8 to 1. But you know, it is actually interesting to say that to 5 to 1. You know, like just the traditionally white groups. Let's see how many African Americans. I'm trying to look up how many African Americans there are in the world. Oh, okay, 45 million. 45 million. Okay. Right. Or 40 million if you want. Okay, so a territory under enemy control, therefore, is governed against the interests of the majority. Such zones are economically, militarily, and politically alienated. It is precisely in these territories that the enemy has its military camps, aerodromes, naval establishments, and broadcasting stations, and where foreign banks, insurance firms, mining, industrial, and trading companies have their headquarters. In other words, these zones are enemy nerve centers. Okay, so let's pay attention to this actually. A territory under enemy control, therefore, is governed against the interests of the majority. Such zones are economically, militarily, and politically alienated. It is precisely in these areas that the enemy has its military camps, aerodromes, naval broadcasting stations, where foreign banks, trading companies have their headquarters. In other words, these are nerve centers. That means you're supposed to attack them. Okay? Clear proof of the neo-colonialist and neo-liberated character of these states is seen in the refusal of their governments to allow liberation movements to open offices, establish bases, or enjoy freedom of transit for troops and equipment on their way to the front. The strength of a territory under enemy control may be assessed by taking into account the following factors. The level, let me just use one. One, the level of organization attained by the reactionary forces and controlled there. Two, the type and degree of repression exerted against the People's Liberation Movement. Three, the degree and modes of exploitation exerted upon the toiling masses. Four, the military means available to the reactionaries in power. Five, the nature of the economic interest imperialism is out to promote in that territory and its neighboring areas. For example, strategic mining, important commercial and industrial complexes, etc. And six, the overall strategic advantages which imperialism hopes to gain from the subjugation of the territory. Such gains may be exclusively political. Right? So as far as our struggle is concerned, our most vital asset is a degree of revolutionary awareness attained by the workers and the masses in the zone under enemy control. The political maturity or immaturity of the masses constitutes the main difference between an enemy-held zone and a contested zone. The revolutionary awareness of the broad masses is an enemy-held zone must express itself in national boycotts, strikes, sabotage, and insurrection. Right? It would be a mistake to maintain that the total of areas under enemy control is exactly equal to the sum of neo-colonialist and colonialist governments. Socio-political phenomena are less mechanical than that. In each case, it is the level of the people's awareness and participation that counts. So, I mean, this is actually this is important that we realize, again, like I said, at some point we have to say to ourselves, where do we want to fight, and why do we want to fight? And if we are in an enemy zone, then yes, okay, do your boycott, your strikes, your sabotage, your insurrection. You know what I mean? Do those stuff. You know what I mean? I say sometimes repatriation, but reality is this. Look, if you're not leaving, then be a revolutionary. Or not necessarily a revolutionary. Because like I said, you see, I would use the word insurrectionist. I would use the word insurrectionist because you're not fighting for land, you're fighting to sabotage a global system and make it easier for the people at home, the people in Africa. And that's really like at the end of the day, because when you make it easier for the people in Africa, what happens is that in turn makes it easier for you, but you have to realize too that a lot of the people in the West under this white domination system, they are friendly to the white domination system. They want the white domination system. They want this quote unquote social welfare, and you have to deal with that too. The reality that a lot of the people who are going to be like your neighbors in the West are particularly are not for Africa at all, and that's something that we have to understand. So contested zones. A zone under enemy control can at any time become a contested area if the revolutionary forces and activity there are either on the verge of armed struggle or have reached an advanced stage of revolutionary organization. In some cases, a spark is enough to determine the turning point from preparation to action. In other circumstances, the embers can smolder underground for a much longer period. Sham independence zones where the awakened masses have placed the enemy in such a precarious position that a single spark can start a prairie fire can no longer be said to be under enemy control. In such a situation, the enemy is only superficially in command and relies exclusively on support, and the police, civil service, and the army may retain control only as long as the force of habit remains unchallenged. It is to be noted that the army and police are never homogeneous forces in Africa. This factor is of obvious tactical interest in the revolutionary struggle, primarily based on the workers and peasants, but also aiming to obtain the support of all other possible elements. In these zones of revolutionary transition, the population feels deeply in sympathy with the revolutionary forces in neighboring areas, and others give them invaluable assistance. The transitional zones may, one, either be used to organize the liberation of another neighboring territory, which is economically more important and politically more mature, for instance, where a party of revolutionary opposition is already operating against the government, or two, in case of strategic necessity, directly seize from the enemy through the organization and armed actions of the dissatisfied masses. A careful study should be made of the range of possibilities offered by the territory under puppet neo-colonialist control. Full investigation will disclose that the puppet government is not homogeneous and that it is therefore vulnerable. It will also be found that the people are often virtually liberated, but they are not aware of it because no one has organized them to act purposely to seize what is their due: political control and the control of economic wealth. So you want to have these two things: political control and the control of economic wealth. Okay, and not having those, that's why you fight. That's why you fight. Between a zone under enemy control where the masses are awakening and a hotly contested zone, there's only one missing link: a handful of genuine revolutionaries prepared to organize and act. That's what you want to be: genuine revolutionary, prepared to organize and act. And the thing is that that's a shortness. People are not like. Don't expect that. Don't expect that. You have to organize it. If you're not organizing it, don't even expect it. Okay, don't even expect it. You can't rely on it because you don't even know who these people are. You don't even know who they are. There are many more contested zones than liberated zones. In fact, the total area of contested zones covered most of the African continent. All the more reason why we should take vigilant care of our liberated territories. A contested zone is not only a zone of revolutionary activity, but is also an area in which the People's Party works underground or semi-clandestinely to organize the overthrow of a puppet government. But there is no fundamental difference between armed struggle as such and organized revolutionary action of a civil type. So there's no fundamental difference between armed struggle as such and organized revolutionary action of a civil type. The various methods of our struggle and of the changing from one method to another should be determined mainly by the circumstances and the set of conditions prevailing in a given territory. The forces struggling in the contested zones are in the front line of the revolutionary liberation movement. They must receive material support from the liberated zones in order to carry their mission through to a successful end. This involves the development of the struggle until a people's insurrectionary movement is able to assume power. Able to assume power. A political party operating in a contested zone may be said to be truly revolutionary if it is actively organizing the people, training cadres, etc. Its essential objective is the total destruction of the puppet governments or the colonial powers in order to build in its place the organs of the people's political power based on mass organization and mass education. The latter objective can only be achieved through a policy of direct confrontation with the enemy and not through devious negotiations and compromise. This is the only correct approach to the African situation if the problem of the revolution is to be studied in depth and from the people's point of view. Retarding factors. However, certain factors have retarded the final unleashing of anti-imperialist action and the unfolding of a people's revolution throughout the African nations. One, the readiness of imperialists to exploit any cracks in our armor. Okay? So imperialists are always looking for cracks in our armor. Two, the undue emphasis placed on diplomatic procedure and negotiations to provide solutions. You don't need that stuff. Three, the varying degrees of isolationism practiced where the cadres of ruling parties, in spite of their recognition on a theoretical level of the necessity of a continental anti-imperialist struggle and reconstruction. But again, Kwame Nkrumah is just insisting on this continental thing, and while it's good, it's not that serious. Because again, it's not that practical. It's not that practical. Number 4, the tendency manifested by certain ruling parties in the liberating zone to indulge in a slack wait-and-see policy, merely toying with the progressive ideas and neglecting to analyze, handle, and resolve a national problems in a positive way. This is creating a dangerous climate of uneasiness, confusion, and discouragement for African revolutionaries, and fertile ground for neo-colonialist intrigues and attacks. And number 5, the existence of a more or less conspicuous opportunism among some leaders of the liberation movement, both in the liberated contested territories, which is symptomatic of a low level of ideological conviction. This is actually a pretty big book. Alright. High command. So Africa will be liberated sooner or later against all odds. But if it is to be soon, by an accelerated revolution of the people and a total war against imperialism, then we must establish a unified continental high command here and now to plan revolutionary war and to initiate action. If we fail to do this and to lead the people's revolution, we are likely to be swept away one by imperialism and neocolonialism. It is no longer feasible to take a middle course. The time for reform, however progressive, is past. The reforms cannot hold the enemy at bay, nor can they convince the silent internal agents of neocolonialism, eliminate the puppets, or even destroy the capitalist structure and mentality inherited from colonialism. The cancerous growths are proliferating at the very heart of our parties in territories whether they emerge under the cloak of constitutionalism, parliamentarism, bureaucratic etiquette, and imposing civil service. Officers trained in Western apolitical tradition to maintain the bourgeois capitalist status quo by means of military coups, or if they appear in the more obvious guise of corruption and nepotism. The people's armed struggle, the highest form of political action, is revolutionary catalyst in the neo-colonialist situation. Peaceful political action to achieve liberation have been proved ineffective with the so peaceful political action to achieve liberation have been proved ineffective. Pay attention. With the ascension of the majority of African states to independence and the advent of neocolonialism on a massive scale, and B, with the increasingly continental dimension of our struggles. Pacific political action was in general, pacific political action was in general potent during the national phase of the liberation movement, and mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, where independence often developed in a chain reaction. However, even then there were significant exceptions. In Kenya, for example, where recourse to peaceful political action was denied to the masses, the people's movement resorted to more direct and concentrated action in the form of Mau Mau. In Algeria, a 7-year armed liberation struggle was needed. Elsewhere, the independence movement pushed beyond the fringe of pacifism, as in Ghana and Guinea, where positive action was employed. The crystallization of a more concentrated form of political action is in fact to be found in the development of almost all African independence movements. The reason for this was the need to establish a new social order after normal independence had been achieved and the escalation of imperialist action. The latter appeared in, this brother makes lists though, I'm not gonna front, this brother makes lists. It's like list all over. Alright, 1, the corruption of independence through neocolonialism and puppet regimes. 2, direct imperialist aggression against liberation forces, for example in the Congo. And 3, increased multilateral and bilateral imperialist support to A, remaining colonial powers, Portugal, Spain, B, fascist racist regimes, Rhodesia, South Africa, and C, puppet regimes and local reactionaries to assist their infiltration in attempts to suppress progressive and revolutionary forces throughout the continent. In less than 3 years from 1960, the armed force of struggle became a necessity of the African anti-colonial liberation movement, and the same process may be observed in most neocolonialist situations. From the 1961 onward, the armed form of political action reached another turning point with the creation of a united front coordinating the struggles of freedom fighters in all the Portuguese colonies. This organization, CONCP, links up the politico-military struggle of 12,400,000 inhabitants over an area of some 2 million square kilometers. In addition, then, anti-imperialist pacifism is dying, and on a continental scale, because one, political action which led to independence deviated to become the sole monopoly and privilege of the reactionary elite, which deprives the masses of a right to political action, even in a specific and constitutional form. So, again, you want to be politically empowered wherever you go. When you go to Africa, you want to be, or wherever you are in Africa, you want to be politically empowered. That's foremost. So, all right, number two, neocolonialism has created a situation whereby the masses are exploited beyond the safe limits of exploitations. The ensuing massive explosion of pent-up discontent can be nothing but violent. The masses seize back their right to political action and make maximum use of it. 3. Imperialist action is escalating. A. To consolidate its position, military coups, d'états. Let's see, he made a list in the list. Military coup d'état in neo-colonialist states, and B. To gain ground and recapture lost initiative, reactionary groups, coup d'état in progressive states. 4. Imperialism constantly infiltrates revolutionary opposition groups with agents, special police, and other compelling such groups to arm even before they have attained the organizational stages of armed struggle. So they infiltrate the revolutionary groups. You know what I mean? They infiltrate them, and they try to rush the whole process. Try to arm them before anything. All right. So number 5. Whenever the pseudo-democratic institutions inherited from colonial rule are not used by its inheritors to build capitalism, but are gradually remodeled or suddenly restructured toward the socialist line of development, imperialists intervene violently. And then number 6, violence clears the neo-colonialist fog and reveals the invisible enemy and the subtle methods of camouflage employed by neo-colonialists. The issues are made clear. I should have done this earlier. I'm kind of tired, actually. Alright. As soon as the initial revolutionary unit emerge, the puppet regime is doomed. A chain reaction begins. The puppets are compelled to break the promises they have made. They have survived in the teeth of opposition only because they uneasily preserved an outward appearance of progressive action. Now they have to suppress and kill openly in order to survive. Once the first drop of patriotic blood is shed, and the fight for puppet regime is irrevocably condemned. Guerrilla points spread like oil stains. Okay. Not only have the internal contradictions of neocolonialism fully ripened, the African masses have attained such a degree of political awareness that they literally force the struggle to break out into the open. Yeah, so he's saying that like white people are trying to avoid revolutionaries, period. And they do this pretty effectively in white majority states, but not so as effective in white minority states. So, or black majority states, right? So the international balance of forces, and more particularly the existence of powerful socialist states, give rise to the theory that in certain territories dominated by imperialism on our continent, it was possible to take a Pacific road to socialism. But such reasoning is based on the false premise that the question of coordinating revolutionary action in Africa and the world has already been solved, and that therefore imperialism is no longer able to concentrate its forces to act decisively against the most threatening part of the population liberation front. But in reality, the situation is quite different. Imperialists are waging an all-out struggle against the socialist states and the revolutionary liberation movements through military means and through insidious but powerful methods of psychological warfare, propaganda. Imperialists have formed an international syndicate of military and economic forces to achieve its aggressive aims. 3. Imperialists have in recent years assisted in the establishment of numerous puppet governments in Africa. The historical experience of the people of Asia, Latin America, and Africa has shown that Imperialism has often forcefully intervened to prevent the peaceful achievement of socialism. In the case of Ghana, a coup occurred at the very time a decisive turning point in socialist development was about to be reached. The continental scope now attained by popular insurrection in Africa is a reality. It remains for us to devise effective coordinating machinery. So I think I actually might end. I wanted to write the whole thing, but I'm actually ridiculously tired. This is a heavy reading, so I'm just gonna read this last 3 paragraphs. Okay. All right. So our accumulated experience has shown that only practical and planned coordination on a continental scale will prevent the enemy from concentrating its forces on isolated and therefore more vulnerable targets. In our war, isolation is one of the greatest dangers. We have already been able to outpace the enemy in certain ways by increasing our means of production, bringing a higher level of organization to the people, spreading the essential features of the African People's Revolution, unmasking Neocolonialism and its puppets. We have succeeded in accumulating energy and willpower, but it is also true that we have not yet defeated either the external or the internal enemy. For victory, a political military organization must be established to provide the machinery for a qualitative conversion of reactionary action in Africa. So yeah, it's a lot to read. And let me just see. Yeah. Look at that. He's talking about physical training and stuff. Oh man, I'm missing out. Yeah, I'm kind of tired. You see, look at that. The training of women, man. All right. Well, another time we could finish this. It's just a lot, and hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I do. Although I'm kind of tired, so it's actually a little bit harder for me. But yeah. So it's up to this right here, political military organization. But thank you so much for listening. Hopefully I'll see you on part 2. But so far, yeah, we did it. We got through. And shoot, now it's like my bedtime. Huh? Alright, Shemi Motep, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll hear from you another time.